Okay, good evening, everyone. We're going to call the meeting to order. Thank you to those who are here this evening for a number of different files. First on the agenda this evening is actually our Committee of Adjustment meeting. So it precedes the council meeting where we're looking at some applications for rezoning. So to that end, we're going to start with the Committee of Adjustment because there are quicker files and they won't take as much time, and then we'll proceed to our council meeting. So they're all part of the same meeting, except Committee of Adjustment is focused on, yes. Oh, okay. We can absolutely do that. Thank you. Okay. You know, Megan. Good? Is this better? Okay, awesome. So as I was saying, we're going to start the meeting with our Committee of Adjustment meeting, which is to consider applications for minor variances. I believe that many of you are here for the council meeting where there's some rezoning applications on deck, and those will be coming. The Committee of Adjustment meeting usually takes about 20-ish minutes, and then we'll transition right into our council meeting. So with that in mind, I'm going to declare our Committee of Adjustment meeting open, and I'll look to council colleagues for a mover and a seconder for approval of the minutes from October 12th, 2022 and December 14th. Can I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you. Councillors Barclay and O'Sullivan. Next is disclosures of interest, colleagues, in regards to the three applications this evening for 107 Elma Street West, 391 County Road 18, and 33 Centre Street. Are there any declarations of interest? Seeing none, I'll move on. And then we're going to transition right into the public hearings, and I'm going to have Ms. Wood read the legislative text to move us into the public hearing. Thank you.
Thank you, Madam Mayor. The Committee of Adjustment will now hold a public meeting to consider application number A17-22 for lands located at 107 Alma Street West, being part of Lot 1 on Registered Plan 15M-28, geographic town of Kemptville, now the municipality of North Grenville, to increase the permitted lot coverage for a single-family dwelling. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed minor variance application. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before the committee makes a decision on the proposed variance application, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. I, Debbie Wood, Secretary-Treasurer, will keep a record summary of this meeting. Any persons who wish further notice of the committee's decision concerning this matter should give their full names, address, and postal code to myself following adjournment of this public meeting. Are there people here for this public meeting? And if so, could you please acknowledge?
So anyone here for 107 Elma Street? We didn't expect that there would be, but thank you for confirming. So we'll carry on.
I will now pass the meeting over to Phil Mosher, Deputy Director of Planning and Development, who will give an overview of the application for 107 Alma Street West.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. Next slide, please. So as mentioned, the request for variance tonight is to vary Section 13.2 of the zoning bylaw to allow an increase in lot coverage from 30% to 42% to allow construction of a single detached residence, attached garage, and deck at the subject property. Next slide, please. This is the subject location. So Alma Street was a relatively recent subdivision within an older part of town. Alma Street continues to the west and to the east. Country Walk subdivision a little further to the west, and then the B&H Shopping Center to the east over on Rito Sanders Street. Next slide, please. So this is the proposed lot grading and drainage plan that's been submitted. And when the calculation was done at the building permit stage to determine did it comply with zone standards, it was found that it was over lot coverage. So this is not an uncommon occurrence for newer builds. And especially for this subdivision, it didn't go through a site-specific zone amendment at the time that the subdivision was created, so it didn't have an updated lot coverage standard. With all of that being said, they are looking for an increase to 42%. The lot grading and drainage plan is the document that serves to assure staff and others that they'll be able to handle all increases in stormwater from the requested increase in lot coverage. Next slide, please. In the opinion of staff, is more consistent with more recent subdivisions. And then the proposal would comply with all other zone standards for the development, and construction of the dwelling would not occur on any easement. Next slide, please. No comments were received from any neighboring property owners. A few inquiries just about general information, and we did receive a letter of no objection from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority. Next slide, please. So based on the foregoing, it's staff's recommendation that the lot coverage should be increased from 30% to 42% to facilitate construction at the subject property. In our opinion, it's achieving the general intent of a residential designation by the official plan, generally consistent with the zoning bylaw, and represents appropriate and desirable use of land. Next slide, please. That concludes my presentation. I'm happy to answer questions.
So colleagues on this one, are there any questions or concerns? I understand, Mr. Mosher, that the property is vacant right now, is that correct?
Yes, Your Worship, that is correct.
And the variances in terms of lot coverage in that area are significant at this stage, or?
I mean, this is comparable to another one that happened on 1315 Alma Street. That was back in November. Also went up to about 42%. So it is consistent with other recent requests.
And is there so is it our official plan that dictates that lot coverage breakdown?
Good question. And it's not the official plan that specifies lot coverage. It's the zoning bylaw itself.
Gotcha. And do you see any reason to, in the future, reconsider the zoning bylaw, given what I think is the increasing trend of more lot coverage versus less?
At a housekeeping amendment tonight, there will be some select recommendations for increases in lot coverage in some subdivisions, and we are working with the Public Works Department. They're doing a stormwater master plan, so we were going to understand, is it appropriate and prudent within older areas of town to increase lot coverage generally? We know in newer subdivisions, yes, their stormwater infrastructure can handle it. We're just answering that question in older parts of town yet. So yes, we do foresee that coming forward in the future.
Okay, that's helpful. Any other questions, concerns, colleagues? Seeing none, the recommendation is that the Committee of Adjustment grant relief for the properties located at 107 Elma Street, being Lot 1 on Registered Plan 15M28, former geographic town of Kemptville, now the municipality of North Grenville, from the following sections of Comprehensive Zoning Bylaw 5012, and that is to provide relief from Section 13.2 to increase the permitted lot coverage from 30% to 42%. So I'll look for a mover and a seconder for that, please. Councillors O'Sullivan, Councillor Strachan, thank you. I'll call the question unless there's any last comment or concern. Seeing none. All in favor? Thank you. All right, that is 107 Elma. That carries. Now we're going to go to County Road 18, and I'll turn it over to Ms. Wood to open up the public meeting. Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Committee of Adjustment will now hold a public meeting to consider application A-18-22 for lands located at 391 County Road 18, Lot 3, Concession 10, Geographic Township of Oxford-on-Rideau, now the municipality of North Grenville, to reduce the required minimum distance separation as calculated from the existing barn from residential use. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed minor variance application. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before the committee makes a decision on the proposed variance application, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. I, Debbie Wood, Secretary-Treasurer, will keep a record summary of this meeting. Any persons who wish further notice of the committee's decision concerning this matter should give their full name, address, and postal code to myself following adjournment of this public meeting. Are there any people here for this public meeting? And if so, could you please acknowledge?
Anyone here for County Road 18? Okay, so I'm recognizing 1, 2, perfect, thank you. 3, awesome, thank you. All right, so we'll proceed with the presentation after Ms. Wood completes her statement, and then if there is wish to comment on the application, we'll invite people to the front. All right.
I will now pass the meeting over to Amy Martin, Director of Planning and Development, who will give an overview of the application for 391 County Road 18.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. If we can go to the next slide, please. So the subject property is located just south of the hamlet of Bishop Mills. It's located on the west side of County Road 18. Next slide, please. The official plan designation is rural, the zoning of the property is rural, and the current use is rural residential. There is a proposed severance for the property, which would create a new rural residential lot. Next slide, please. As mentioned, the applicant is seeking to sever 1 hectare of land from 391 County Road 18. So there is an existing livestock facility, dairy barn, located immediately across the road at 380 County Road 18, with approximately 275 dairy cattle and 60 laying hens. This number is not current. It was provided back in 2021, and I've been informed by the current property owners that they do have more livestock than what was originally provided. Based on the information provided at the time and the minimum distance separation formula, there is a required minimum setback of 329 meters from that livestock facility. Next slide, please. So the entirety of the property at 391 County Road 18 would fall within the minimum distance separation required from that existing livestock facility. There is a requested reduction of 42% to reduce the setback from 329 meters to 190 meters, which would allow for a 0.5 hectare building envelope on the proposed new lot. Future expansion of the livestock facility would require a separate MDS calculation. At the time, it was anticipated that the existing house at 391 County Road 18 would be closer than the proposed residential lot and the proposed house that was to be constructed on that lot. Any future reductions required associated with the livestock expansion would be to the existing dwelling, and that was the original understanding of what could the requirement for reduction may be, given just the existing development in the area. If we go to the next slide, please. This is a projection that just shows what that 190-meter setback would look like and the provision of what a building envelope could look like on the property should the distance be reduced and a severance granted. Next slide, please. The policy considerations for this property are quite repetitive. The province establishes policy for development across the province of Ontario. In regards to residential lot development, it permits lot creation on rural lands, and it does require that new lots must comply with the minimum separation distance formula. And one thing to note is that there are guidelines associated with minimum distance separation, and guideline number 43 does allow for municipalities through their committee of adjustment or through a zoning amendment to reduce an MDS setback. Next slide, please. We did receive a letter of support from Mr. Graham, a neighboring property owner, but we also did receive concerns from an adjacent agricultural operations on the impacts of the minor variance to their operation. The concerns have been circulated to the committee for their consideration, and a response has been provided from the planner on file for the applicant to the neighboring property owners, realizing that the response came quite late in today. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So at this time, it's my recommendation that the Committee of Adjustment defer this decision to our February Committee of Adjustment meeting to allow for additional time for the applicant and the neighboring agricultural operation to discuss the concerns raised in relation to the proposed reduction in minimum distance separation. So conversations have been ongoing between the municipality and the applicant's planner, as well as the neighboring property owners, to find if there's some tangible solutions in which could be implemented to reduce the future potential impact should the livestock facility across the street need to expand and reduce any future potential objections or concerns being raised in regard to that livestock facility. The main concern is that we are going from just one residence within their influence area and adding an additional. So there's more care and consideration around that. So to that end, that ends my formal presentation. Like I've noted, the planner on file is in attendance tonight to answer questions related to the application, and the neighboring property owners here as well are here if there are any questions about their operation just in general. Thank you.
Okay, as this is a public hearing, if the applicant or the applicant's representative wishes to speak, or the neighboring property owner wishes to speak, now is the time to put your comments on the record. Okay, welcome. Come on down. Yes. And if you could just introduce yourself, that would be helpful.
Good evening, Your Worship. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with FO10 Planning and Design. I'll bring that closer. If I'm difficult to hear, I can take my mask.
You were very hard to hear. Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay. Much
Good
better.
evening, Your Worship. My name is Yuko Leclerc. I'm a land use planner with FO10 Planning and Design.
Okay.
I am the planner representing the applicant on this file. We are in receipt of the comment letter and certainly have provided a response. I wanted to speak this evening to speak to 3 items that the applicant is proposing to address concerns that have been raised by the neighbor, but certainly the deferral would allow more time to address any other concerns if these are unsatisfactory. So the 3 changes that are proposed, one of which is actually already represented in the staff recommendation report, is to include a notice on title through a development agreement that would be registered on title, notifying owners of the property that there is an agricultural operation, a long-standing one across the road, and that operation has the ability to expand in the future, but also notifying them of the reason for the setback reduction, what MDS means and so forth. So really notifying the owner, educating them about the potential impact to agricultural operations from the severance.
And what is the reason for the expansion? What is the reason for that proposed expansion? You said you want to put that on title, right? You want to make explicit the rationale for a potential expansion.
It would allow, effectively, the intention of this variance is to allow a house to be built, a lot to be created and a house to be built. The farm across the road has been there a long time, and should they wish to expand in the future, they will have to go through their own MDS, it's called MDS2 calculation as part of their building permit process. So when they do that, the MDS2 will establish a separation distance for any expanded facilities or manure storage facilities from sensitive uses that exist in the area. Now, the goal of this particular severance and the changes that I'll be speaking to in a moment is to ensure that the creation of this new lot and the new home that's built on it doesn't impose a new restriction on the ability of that farm to expand in the future over what already exists. There's already 2 houses that are very close. So the goal is to ensure that any house built on this lot will be far enough away that it won't create a new restriction on that barn.
Gotcha. Okay, that's helpful. Is there anything else you want to speak to on behalf of the applicant?
Certainly. So that's the first item. The second item is to include a condition for a change of use permit to be required. There is the letter indicated there's a horse barn across the road on the retained lot. It's not currently used as a horse barn, but it has in the past. And what this condition would do is ensure that the owners take out a permit from the township that would effectively prohibit the use of that structure from housing livestock. So that's the second item, so that it doesn't trigger its own MDS separation. And then the third would be to introduce sort of an additional variance, an additional clause or a provision in the variance. So we're asking for a variance to reduce the setback to 190 meters, but the additional sort of clause that we would be seeking in the variance would be establishing a 100-meter setback from the front lot line on the severed lot. Now that works out to being about 4 times greater of a setback than what applies to the existing sort of old limestone house on the property, and that would ensure that the new house is very much farther back on the property and wouldn't have any impact or restrict development potential of the agricultural operation in the future. So those are the 3 items.
One on the applicant's property or neighboring applications.
So the 100-meter setback would be on the new
Yep.
severed lot, so that the farm across the road, if they did wish to grow,
Exactly.
it would be
Okay.
very far away.
So my understanding is ultimately the objective is not to imperil neighboring farms from being able to expand if this severance goes through. Is that?
Your Worship, that's exactly right.
Okay. So you're trying to find ways to do that,
That's right.
right? To give comfort to neighbors and others who may in the future wish to expand.
Certainly.
Okay. And the minimum distance setback is a provision within our official plan, is that correct?
So
Or is it through the province?
It's everywhere. It comes from the province.
Yep.
It's reflected in the township's official plan. It's also reflected in the zoning bylaw.
Okay, awesome. I know that there may be others wishing to speak. Is there others who wish to speak? No? Any hands raised? No? Okay. So with that in mind, I'll look to council colleagues. Any questions here, council colleagues? So I understand the recommendation is a deferral, and the deferral just gives more time, I think, to work this out so that there's a level of comfort and confidence. And obviously, I think the proposed severance seems practical, but completely understand the need for being diligent and building in precautions to not unduly impact neighboring properties. So if that's the case, then I'll look for a mover and a seconder for the deferral. Councillor Barkley, need a seconder? Okay, Councillor Wilson. And when would we expect this to come back, Ms. Martin?
So the recommendation is February.
Okay, excellent. And are we confident that gives everyone enough time?
Yes, and if more time is needed, we would just bring a resolution at the next committee of adjustment to seek just further
Yeah.
push out of that to the March meeting
Okay.
if required.
And just last call, does anyone else wish to speak to this? Seeing not? Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor of the deferral, please raise your hands. Okay, good. Thank you for being here. It was really helpful. Appreciate it. So we'll move on to our last committee of adjustment item, and that is for 33 Center Street. And over to you, Ms. Wood, to open up the public meeting.
Thank you, Your Worship. The Committee of Adjustment will now hold a public meeting to consider application A-19-22 for lands located at 33 Center Street, Lot 5, Concession 1, Geographic Township of Oxford-on-Rideau, now the Municipality of North Grenville, to permit reconstruction of a dwelling at a reduced setback from the normal high water mark, at a reduced setback from the regulatory floodline, to recognize non-complying lot coverage, and a non-complying eastern interior side yard setback. I must advise you that this meeting is your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed minor variance application. If an appellant does not provide oral submissions at this public meeting or written submissions before the committee makes a decision on the proposed variance application, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider their objections. I, Debbie Wood, Secretary Treasurer, will keep a record summary of this meeting. Any persons who wish further notice of the committee's decision concerning this matter should give their full name, address, and postal code to myself following adjournment of this public meeting. Are there any people here for this public meeting? And if so, could you please acknowledge?
33 Center Street, awesome. Are you the applicants? Okay, awesome, thank you. All right, so we'll pass it over.
Yeah, we will now pass the meeting over to Phil Mosher, Deputy Director of Planning and Development, who will give an overview of the application for 33 Center Street.
Thank you, Ms. Wood. If we could have the next slide, please. Okay, so there's several variances being proposed. I'm going to speak to them first, and then we will show the image, because I think that really helps to tell the story here. But essentially, there was an existing cottage on the subject property, 33 Center Street, within Burt's Rapids. And it enjoyed grandfathered rights. Another term for that in the planning world is legal nonconforming. But it was closer to the water. It was closer to a side yard. It was already over lot coverage than the zone standards permit. And so our office has been in conversations with the applicants for well over a year about how they wished to go about to reconstruct the dwelling on the property. They did obtain a demolition permit, so that's the dwelling is gone. I've been out to the site most recently within the past 2 weeks. And so with the reconstruction that's being proposed, some improvements are being proposed to the setback from the normal high water mark, the setback from the interior side yard, as well as a slight decrease in lot coverage to bring it closer. But even with all of the slight improvements and slight increases that are being proposed, they're still not able to achieve full compliance with the zone standards on the subject property. So I guess we should go to the next slide, please. So this is the property. It has split zoning, so the pinkish area is identified as limited services residential. It's a very rare zone category within the zone bylaw itself. It kind of reflects an older standard. And so that would be the traditional kind of cottage thing, although it still does allow a seasonal as well as a year-round dwelling. And then close to the north end of the property, you can see that that's the Rideau River. And then there's like a grayish, lighter gray color towards the river, and that is the floodplain zone category itself. So there's definitely setbacks associated with water. If we could go to the next slide, I think that does help to show. So on the blown up image of this, what you can see is you can see that there is a outline of the previous dwelling on the property, which was removed. And then you can see in darker black lines over top of it where the new dwelling is proposed. It is hard to make it out at this scale, but the long and short of it is that there's a slight increase in the improvement to the setback from the Rideau River. So previously it was maybe at about 17 meters. It's now at about 17.3, so slight pushing back. And part of the reason it could not go further back is because when you have rural properties that have private services, there's constraints with the septic systems and the wells, and there's minimum distances from wells and septic systems and things like that. So really and truly, this is pushing it probably as far back as it can go. It is located outside the floodplain, and the applicants have obtained a regulatory approval from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority demonstrating that. Our zone standards, while we require 30 meters from the normal high water mark for buildings and structures, we also require 15 meters from the edge of the floodplain. So again, it can't quite meet that, but it is going to be outside the floodplain when reconstructed. So it's about 12.9 meters from the edge of the floodplain itself. At the north end of the property, it was located about 2 meters from that interior side yard before. Now it's going to be about 4. So again, a slight improvement there. And then in terms of lot coverage, previously it was at about 22, 23%. And with this proposal, they're coming down to about 20%, which is closer to the 15% cap set within the limited services residential zone. Next slide, please. So again, just to reiterate, it is proposing modest improvements all around while not yet being able to comply. Through the back and forth that staff has had with the applicant, we do think that this is a really good effort to uphold their grandfathered rights that exist while still providing some modest improvements. Next slide, please. At the time that this slide deck was prepared, we did not receive any comments from neighboring property owners. However, after doing the proper circulation, we did receive a copy of, or just a question from one resident. Nothing else was asked for after the resident followed up. We received a copy of the septic permit that had been obtained by the applicant, and we received a copy of the regulatory permit from the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority that's been issued for the reconstruction. Next slide, please. Also, a note from the building department that a building permit will be required, as well as a note from Emergency and Protective Services after the slide deck was prepared, just to continue to maintain emergency access along the private right-of-way that accesses the property. Next slide, please. So when you're close to water, it's always a little bit challenging for redeveloping, but we think that the best has been done here. We are recommending that the application be supported with some conditions, and those conditions would be confirmation that as-built grades and setbacks and elevations have been achieved, so an as-built grading plan at the end of the project. Providing a plan which shows how they could do some compensatory planting along the river itself, just to provide an improved vegetative buffer. And that will help, even though they can't get to the 30 meters back from the water, the vegetative buffer helps to control pollution before it gets into the water itself. And then provision of an erosion and sediment control plan, which shows how during construction and after, before revegetated, there'll be a capture and a control of sediments that doesn't go flow overland into the water body itself. Next slide, please. So in the opinion of staff, this is consistent with the overall vision for this village with the hamlet residential designation. It's making minor improvements to the zoning bylaw, so there is greater conformity that's being achieved. It is outside the floodplain, and with some of the compensation efforts that could be undertaken, it's seen to represent good land use planning. And that concludes my presentation, but I'm happy to answer questions.
Thank you. So I acknowledge the applicants are in the room. Do the applicants wish to speak? No? You're okay? Okay. So then I'll go to council colleagues. Any questions on this one? Colleagues? Councilor Barclay?
Thank you, Madam Mayor. Through you to Mr. Mosher. I hear this characterized as a reconstruction and a rebuild, but the existing building is gone. So is that just legal language to facilitate these variances? I'm curious why we're talking about a reconstruction when it doesn't.
Yeah, it's through you, Your Worship. There is a legal, a time frame. I'm not a lawyer, but once a demolition permit has been obtained, it sort of starts the clock on a point in time at which, if too much time has passed and you wanted to reconstruct what you had, you'd be starting over and you'd be trying to comply with the zoning bylaw as it existed. So with the demolition, they've always desired to reconstruct. That's always been conveyed to staff throughout the process. So no legal term per se, but they never desired to let it sit idle for an extended period of time to lose any rights that they may have had.
I thought it was a legal situation. The second question I have is in terms of as-built lot grading. We're requiring them to provide, the provision that we're requiring them is to provide an as-built grading plan. How do we confirm that? Is that, what is an as-built grading plan? What's involved?
Thank you, and through you, Your Worship. So before building, you provide a lot grading and drainage plan, which shows setbacks that you'll achieve and spot grades, top of elevation, top of foundation, those kinds of details. So once it's actually constructed, a surveyor goes out, measures the setback distances, measures the top of foundation, confirms that yes, they've been met or exceeded, and that spot grades around the property have been achieved. So that's what's being asked for.
And that's at the applicant's cost, not ours.
Yeah, that is correct. And it's also a condition that was requested through the Conservation Authority as part of their regulatory permit too.
Thanks. That's all my questions.
Okay. It sounds like the applicants have gone through quite a bit of work. I think Burris Rapids is a teeny tiny hamlet, so to see some new residential interest is always exciting, and we're hopeful that all the pieces can come together. I know floodplains, being what they are, may change in the decades to come just because of climate change and what have you. So hopefully some of the mitigation efforts that are proposed protect the property owners into the future. I don't think we can really tell how it's all going to go 50 years from now. So that being said, Mr. Mosher, you've made a clear recommendation, so I'll look for a mover and a seconder to that. And okay, Councillor Strachan, Councillor Sullivan, did you raise your hand? Okay, so we have a mover and a seconder. Any last questions here? Okay, I'll call the vote. All in favor, please. Good, thank you. All right, that passes. Thank you to the applicants for being here. Best of luck with your efforts. And we'll move to adjourn Committee of Adjustment, Ms. Wood. Is that at my discretion or yours? Okay. Councillor Wilson, Councillor Barkley, we're moving and seconding the adjournment of our Committee of Adjustment at 7:07 p.m. All in favor? Good. Thank you. So that takes us to our regularly scheduled council meeting, where we have a number of planning applications and a delegation, among other things. There is, colleagues, two proposed amendments to the agenda, but before I get there, I would like to invite Councillor Wilson, had volunteered earlier this afternoon to read our land acknowledgement as part of our commitment to truth and reconciliation in the municipality. So, Councillor Wilson, do you want to proceed?
Thank you, Your Worship. The municipality of North Granville acknowledges that the municipality operates on the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Anishinaabe. We honor the historic relationship of the Haudenosaunee and the Huron-Wendat peoples to this land. We recognize all First Nations, Métis, and Inuit who now call North Granville their home. We respect and support the need for cultivating a strong relationship with all Indigenous peoples, and we look forward to continuing this conversation and fostering the path towards reconciliation.
Thank you, Councillor Wilson. So we'll move to the agenda, and I understand, Councillor Barkley, we would like to add the approval of two members to the BI board as per the board's deliberations earlier this week. So I think that we can certainly add that at the end of our agenda under other business. In addition, colleagues, as I notified you earlier, there is a closed session required at the end of the meeting, and that is in regards to a land negotiation currently underway. So I'm asking for your indulgence on a very short closed session to update you on that. So those are the proposed amendments to the agenda. Can I have a mover and a seconder for the amended agenda? Thank you, Councillor Wilson, Councillor Barkley. And I should ask, are there any other amendments from council colleagues? Not seeing anything. So I'll call the question on the amended agenda, please. Good. The one thing I didn't mention, but has been foreseen, is that I think Sustainable North Grenville is here to do a brief presentation for us under the delegation section that had been worked out with the clerk, who isn't here this evening. So I think we'll invite Sustainable North Grenville to do that now. Was that your expectation, colleagues? Yep. Okay. Okay. You can see there's a lot of people here for forthcoming planning discussions, but if you'd like to take 10 minutes and give us what you got, let's do it. I'll have to time you and be disciplined. Thank you for coming. I know you were here in December, hopeful to do the same thing, so we certainly don't want to put you off any further. We know you've carefully considered some planning issues, as it turns out, that have come to pass as a result of the province's actions. So welcome, and if you could just introduce yourselves.
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council. My name is Tom Graham. I live in Bishops Mills. This is Dr. Sarah Tuck, who will speak shortly. We are with the group Sustainable North Grenville, a group of concerned citizens created to help raise awareness about social, economic, and environmental sustainability issues in North Grenville. We're also joined this evening by Steve Gabel, who is with the local Green Party and with the Kemptville Environmental Group. So, as you know, back in October, the Ontario government passed Bill 23, the More Homes Built Faster Act. This bill will have many negative impacts on our community and communities across the province. And I know for a fact there's a presentation that Director Martin has put together that you'll be looking at either very shortly or at great length somewhat later in the meeting. So thank you for the chance to speak a little bit beforehand. It is claimed that not only will this bill not achieve its stated goal of addressing affordable housing, but actually reverse decades of environmental and water protection and contribute further to the climate crisis. To protest this damaging bill, last November, Sustainable North Grenville coordinated a protest in front of Minister Steve Clark's office in Brockville. The fact that over 35 people showed up on short notice from across Eastern Ontario shows that people care. Further protests are planned by other groups. Still, the bill passed. Now what?
Thank you, Madam Mayor and members of council, Amy Martin, for your keen attention to this file thus far, ever since the bill was first proposed. Today, I have a few questions following to Tom's introduction. So first and generally, will council go further than simply adapting to the far-reaching consequences of Bill 23 and continue to actively oppose the bill to an end of having it repealed? That's my first question. In particular, could you consider voicing your dissatisfaction to the ministers alongside other municipalities at the Roma conference next week, I believe? We see this as a really great opportunity for what we understand is often hallway conversations, but why not seize that moment? Further, would you consider passing a resolution such as was passed by Ottawa, demanding either a delay in implementation, other adjustments, etc. And to that end, I have submitted to council a sample motion that was created by the Ontario Climate Emergency Coalition. And I think this could be a helpful document to that end. So I hope that you'll take the time to take a look at that. And finally, what can concerned community members such as us do to continue to support this opposition alongside you? Many of us, as Tom mentioned, are deeply disappointed, and we do feel motivated to keep making noise on this, about this damaging provincial move. Thank you very much for giving us the time to speak tonight.
Thank you. So in a nutshell, what is your What is the focus of your critique? The bill is, as you know, far-reaching and has many different facets and elements. If you were to have all or some of the bill repealed, where would you like to see the focus of that repeal?
Do you want to?
So obviously the gutting of the input from the conservation authorities is quite critical. Someone told me prior to this meeting saying that the municipal forces expertise onto the municipal staff that they don't have, notwithstanding their other superpowers. So that's a mistake that should be immediately, that would be one thing immediately to fix. Obviously, development charges is another issue that's going to basically force higher taxes on the average person, which I just, again, it's very short-sighted. So a couple of things, which I think you must have, I have to give you credit. I'm sure you've been talking about this since it came out in October, so I'm sure you have been through most of what we could suggest tonight.
Okay.
Yeah, I agree, and having read Amy Martin's report and taken a look at what she'll be presenting, I feel it's very well covered.
Okay.
I don't have any further particular critique, but I do.
So Ms. Martin's critique and suggestions align with your assessment of the bill and its impacts?
Yeah, I would say so. And I'd just add to that the allowing the sale of greenbelt lands and sort of expansion of building on these lands, as well as Tom mentioned, downgrading or eliminating the authority of the Conservation Authority, those would be at the top of my mind.
Okay, thank you. So we'll open it up to questions, comments from colleagues. Go ahead, Councillor Strachan.
Thank you, through you, Madam Mayor. Thank you, Ms. Tuck and Mr. Graham. Thank you very much for coming out here and voicing your concerns. A few points that I'd like to raise. The RVCA, I sit on the board for the RVCA, and it has been a nonstop conversation since it came out. There was a lot of concern at the time expressed by the Conservation Authority and all of the representative municipalities at the table that there was little time to actually put any meaningful work together and any meaningful reports, simply because the 30-day clock started the day after the election. And so a lot of newness at the council tables, but so it created a bit of a challenge there. Director Martin, her role in sort of leading, creating the report and bringing all this information together for the municipalities and with the Conservation Authority was noted, and so it has been significant. So I think we're very fortunate to have somebody with her particular talents, as well as the rest of staff here, to be able to bring this together in short order. What that resulted in is a record number of the conservation authorities within Eastern Ontario and the municipalities and mayors, CAOs and so on, signing off on a letter to the province stating that they were unequivocally against Bill 23. And so I think that did go forward, that did make it to the right level. Unfortunately, it didn't have an impact or the desired impact, even to delay the approval of it. Your point about the Roma and taking that opportunity, there's an awful lot of conversations that happen on the sidelines at those kinds of conferences, and I think that there is a lot of opportunity to talk with neighboring municipalities and others across the province to find a way to consolidate our points and have, oftentimes there's one letter that's generated by a municipality and it's disseminated to the others saying, would you support us as well? So I would be supportive of that, and I think it's in our best interest to continue the conversation in whatever way we can to see where changes can be made, even if it can't be fully revoked. Thank you.
Thank you.
Other comments, colleagues, at this stage? What we know is even the most expert bodies, right, that represent municipalities province-wide, AMO, right, in particular, and Mr. Dyke plays a particular role on AMO, we're not given any opportunity to present to the relevant committees, to weigh in. Typically, the forum for major legislative changes is one where AMO is engaged because they represent municipalities from all across the province. So it's obvious that I think there was very little appetite to hear from municipalities in this respect. I agree. I think Roma is an important forum. We also sent our own letter in addition to signing the one that many conservation authorities signed onto, and We do expect to have some conversation with Minister Clark in the next 4 to 6 weeks to look at other mechanisms that might restore some of the capacity of conservation authorities to engage with us. There's no doubt there's very far-reaching consequences to the bill, and I think it was obvious that the opinions of municipalities in this case was the least concern among those driving the legislative change that was so very quick. So I appreciate your engagement and sustained focus on seeing if there are things to redeem here ultimately. I think the perspectives of municipalities in rural Eastern Ontario, I think if we are specific in what the impacts are here in particular, I think we might be able to carve out potentially, I think we might be able to facilitate some more focused discussion. So I think some of the fights that are being had with the GTA and other parts of the province may not be ones where our contribution will be well received or even considered. So I think if we look very specifically at a rural Eastern Ontario lens, that may help to identify mechanisms through amendments to the bill in the future or in the regulations that give us a little more leeway. So that's my reflection. But Rome is a great space, for the conversation. I will note that there are municipalities in rural Eastern Ontario that are generally favorable. So they don't have development charges. They don't necessarily see the conservation authorities as constructive. So the landscape here is a little bit varied in terms of where individual municipalities are. I think we're in North Grenville because we've had the benefit of development charges, because we have a very constructive relationship with the Conservation Authority, or apologies to conservation authorities. We see the fallout, and it's quite unfortunate. But I do have to note that it's not every municipality that shares the view that we have, or that we've communicated through the conservation authorities that we work with. So that's my comment for now. Anything else, colleagues? Okay, but thank you, and I hope you stay in touch with us, because your efforts on behalf of residents in this municipality are very relevant to how we move forward. Thank you.
Thanks for your time.
Yeah, for sure. Okay, so colleagues, with that delegation, I neglected to ask for disclosures of interest. So on the items that remain on the agenda, is there any disclosure of interest when it comes to perceived or real financial gain or loss from matters arising on the agenda this evening? Okay, good. So we have 3 items for consent. You'll see them there. They are the adoption of council meeting minutes from December 14th, the appointment of Hilary Janeau as a deputy clerk, and under planning and development, there's a part lot control extension for the creek, and there's a recommended extension to that agreement that's in place with the municipality. Does anyone wish to remove any proposed item from the consent agenda? Seeing none, I'll look for a mover and a seconder to adopt the consent agenda. Councillors O'Sullivan and Barclay, thank you. Any comments or concerns? Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Okay, that brings things along. This evening we have nothing from the CA's office, is that correct? Okay, so we will move now into the public meetings that I think are long awaited from some of our residents in the audience. And I think, Amy, I'll be looking for the script to open up the public hearing for number 1. Thank you, Megan. So this public meeting is in regards to an application to rezone a portion of the property legally described as Concession 4, part of Lot 7, former Township of South Gore, from Agricultural 1 zone to Mineral Aggregate Preservation Zone to recognize the mineral aggregates identified on the subject property within North Grenville's official plan. Obviously, this meeting is an opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have with respect to the proposed amendment. If an appellant does not provide comments at this public meeting, meeting or written submissions before council adopts the amendment, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider the objections. Any person who wishes further notice of the council's decision should obviously provide their information to our Director of Planning and Development, Amy, following adjournment. Contact information can be found on the notice of the public meeting. Anyone wishing to ask a question during the public meeting can do so by coming down to the microphone. When asking a question, please identify yourself and your address as well as postal code. So for this particular application to rezone, and this is Township of South Gore, who is here for that meeting, for that application? Okay, so a number of you. So we'll turn it over, Ms. Martin, I think you're handling this one, so we'll hear Ms. Martin's presentation. If there's those of you who wish to comment, please come down to the mic so we can take into consideration your comments, and we'll go from there. Is the applicant here as well? Ms. Martin?
I do not believe so. They haven't identified themselves.
Okay, so the applicant is not in the room. Okay, all right, so over to you for the presentation, thanks.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we can just go to the next slide, please. So the subject property is located just north of the hamlet of Pelton's Corners. In fact, a part of the property is located within the hamlet boundary of Pelton's Corner itself. Before you is a map that depicts the official plan layer on Land Use Schedule A. So that is the land use schedule that dictates the policies in which would apply to a property. So as you will see, and I'll just kind of describe, because unfortunately I did not include a legend, but to the left, the very far left of the screen, you'll see what looks like a marshy hatching. That is a provincially significant wetland, and that dotted line that you see around there is an influence zone from that wetland. And then the circular markings, that denotes mineral aggregate. So our official plan currently identifies mineral aggregate potential in the property, and so this designation is called Mineral Aggregate Reserve. We'll go to the next slide, please. So the property itself is just shy of 100 acres. It has multiple official plan designations, including agriculture, mineral aggregate reserve, hamlet, and provincially significant wetland. Its zoning includes agriculture 1, environmental protection, which is the wetland, and residential first density. So those are the lands that are within inside the hamlet itself. Surrounding land uses include agricultural, residential, and forested area, which would consider the wetland. Next slide, please. So the proposed amendment before council tonight is to reconsider a zoning amendment to rezone a portion of the lands that are designated as a mineral aggregate reserve within our official plan from, it should be the agriculture 1 zone to the mineral aggregate preservation zone. So the intent of the zoning is to preserve the aggregate where it is identified. The zoning would not permit an aggregate pit or quarry as an as-of-right use. So I just wanted to be clear, because there was some confusion, and I appreciated the comments and the ability to correspond with members of the public to provide some clarification on this matter, is that the establishment of an aggregate pit or quarry is not what's being considered tonight. The intent is to rezone the lands to recognize that in accordance with our official plan, there is identified potential for mineral aggregate on the property. Next slide, please. So as part of the application, planning staff undertook a review of our policy documents. So there are 3 documents that we have regard for. The first being the provincial policy statement. So that's the policy statement that sets the tone for development across the province of Ontario. In regards to rural land use policies, it supports the management or use of resources, as well as agricultural uses and residential lot creation where it is locally appropriate. And section 2.5 of the policy statement states that mineral aggregate resources shall be protected for long-term use. Next slide, please. In regards to the United Counties official plan, which establishes policies at the county level for all of the 11 municipalities within Leeds-Grenville, the policies are consistent with the provincial policy statements, and then policies in regard to rural land designations in the rural area do limit development that is compatible with the rural landscape and can be maintained on rural services. I also wanted to note that Land Use Schedule B of the county's official plan does identify tertiary sand reserves on a portion of this property, and our official plan conforms to those reserves. So there is the identified for a potential tertiary sand reserve on the property. Next slide, please. The municipality's official plan provides policy guidance for mineral aggregate resources, and it is a policy of our official plan on lands within the mineral aggregate reserve designation, which are not zoned for a pit or quarry, to be placed in an appropriate zone category, which will protect the lands from any incompatible land uses. So I think it's also important for context, and I didn't introduce it earlier in my background slides, is that what has triggered this requirement for a zoning amendment is that the property owner has applied for a severance, and they are severing off a lot within the hamlet of Pelton's Corners, so within that residential first density designation. As it is connected to the larger landholding, when we review our policies, one of the items that we do look for is to ensure that the zoning is in conformity with our official plan policies, and in this case, it was determined that there was a portion of the lands in the official plan that have already been identified as having mineral aggregate, not being zoned accordingly. So the recommendation is, and a requirement of the consent application is that they apply for a zoning amendment to put that resource into a preservation zone within the zoning bylaw. And so what that will effectively do is prevent any kind of conflicting land use from encroaching into that reserve location. And the intent behind that is that aggregate resources are fixed and finite in their location, and it's not something that you can just easily pick up and move. So the province from the top down does really push that we do protect aggregate reserves when we can. Next slide, please. And I'm hoping I don't get any laughs for this, because when I did publish the slide deck, I had received no comments, but I have received many comments since then, and I have, for the benefit of the public, I have circulated all comments received to members of council. I've talked to some of you, and I've had many back and forth via email, which were very constructive and were very appreciated. So I'm just going to provide a summary of the concerns that have been received to date. We received a concern from Ms. Lapierre. Originally, her concerns were about the establishment of a pit or a quarry, concerns related to process in regards to notification of public meetings, questions related to the county's aggregate master plan, and clarification on the proposed severance. Ms. Lapierre indicated that she still has some concerns that she would like to address. Mr. Emond provided an objection to the zoning amendment. He was originally concerned with the establishment of a pit or a quarry and the impacts on wetland, agriculture, and rural residents and rural residential communities. And in his secondary email, he still raised concerns in regards to the preservation zoning and making it easier to establish an aggregate operation, and then asking questions in regards to the requirement of the rezoning in light of the severance. Mr. and Ms. Sharma provided concerns over the impacts of a pit or quarry to a neighboring residential use and wildlife. Mr. Lassardin and Ms. Turcott provided a letter with concerns related to the establishment of a pit or a quarry and the negative impacts to the environment, local environment. Mr. Drake would like to be notified of council's decision. Mr. Bryson called to gain more information on the proposed amendment. And Mr. and Ms. Dufresne provided questions related to how a pit or quarry could be established in regards to process, and they also asked for questions related to just process of providing comments regarding zoning applications and future zoning applications. So I do believe I've caught all of the comments that have come through, and like I mentioned, very constructive conversations with members of the public, but I am aware that some of them are here tonight who still wish to address their concerns. Next slide, please. So it is still staff's recommendation that the zoning bylaw amendment be adopted by council to permit the rezoning of the lands from the agriculture 1 zone to the mineral aggregate preservation zone, because again, the intent is to just preserve the aggregate that's identified within the official plan and bring our the zoning schedule for that property in conformity with the official plan. And that concludes my presentation. I am here to take questions from members of council and the public at the time when it's appropriate.
Any comments, colleagues, before I invite members of the public to speak? Okay, Councillor Parkley.
If I might, Madam Mayor, through you to Director Martin, I have two questions. First of all, thank you for explaining what triggered the applicant to apply for rezoning. So my first question is regarding the severance. Are they intending to sever the part that's within the hamlet designation? The southern part, or I'm not sure if that's south, north, east, or west, but there was part that you said was within the hamlet designation?
Through your worship, that is correct. So the portion of the land would be, it's about an acre lot, I believe, within the hamlet boundary itself. So would not go into any area outside of that.
So this was, well, this isn't my second question, but this is a follow-up. This is a necessary step in order for them to sever the property, and it seems to me the intention would be to be able to build a residence. Do you have that kind of information? Have they shared that?
Yeah, so the intent would be with the severance to establish a new building lot. There is a residence on the property about midway up South Gore Drive. The property, I don't believe, quite extends up to Whitney, but the main residence on the property now is located further north of the settlement area, but there is a small area where that new lot would be created to allow for the establishment of a new residence.
Okay, my second question, again, relates to why this is coming forward. You mentioned this is to conform to the official plan, that we have to recognize aggregates as being there. It doesn't lead to opening a pit, but why was that incorrectly designated by the Township of South Gore? Was that just oversight, or why was it designated as agricultural if it had aggregate on it?
Through your worship. So we're talking two different documents here. So the official plan has designated the property as mineral aggregate, and the official plan dates to 2018. So that's the most current version. Our zoning bylaw is from 2012. So typically what happens is when a new official plan is adopted, typically within the 2-year time frame, a zoning amendment is brought forward, and it basically, it's a global amendment that updates the schedules to match the official plan. That didn't happen within that time frame, and so what's been happening is as development applications have been coming forward, and municipal staff are realizing that there's a disjointedness between the official plan layer and the zoning, especially in regards to severances. And we did, I want to say in October of last year, a similar application where we rezoned a portion of the lands to mineral aggregate preservation. We take that opportunity through the condition of consent to require that the property owner bring that into conformity. So we just take the opportunity with other development processes to address the one-offs.
So we're doing this as the cases come forward, conforming it,
That is correct.
the zoning to
Yep.
the official plan. Thank you.
Councillor Sullivan? Go ahead.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Director Martin. Could we look at the slide where the drawing was of the lands? Yes. So my question is, and I can't see, so where is the access to this lot? Off of South Gore Drive?
That is correct.
Okay. And where approximately is the land to be severed? Is it that hash land that's close to Pelton's Corners, Sterling Crescent?
Yes, the lot would be further to the east, though, off of South Gore Drive.
Okay. This way.
Sorry. This is where I wish I had a laser pointer.
Yeah.
So South Gore Drive is on the east side of the property,
Okay, yes.
so the right-hand side of the
Yes.
property. It's at the very bottom of that property. So the property does a bit of a jag. It's kind of right, it'd be in that area of where it kind of, where it's
the
already
little
cut out.
cutout is?
Yeah, just above that cutout. So it would, the lot fabric would match the lot that's just to the south of it, because there's a residential lot already established there.
Okay,
Yeah.
so there's a lot there already. So the applicant, if I just want to clarify for my own thoughts here, the applicant wants to sever that lot and build a home.
That's correct.
And the existing home is somewhere,
It's about midway on the property, I believe. Without the aerial mapping there to confirm, it is further north of Pelton's Corners.
okay. So by building, or by designating this, it just preserves the fact that there's mineral there. And when you say for future use, though, that to me means that they could someday come in and apply to put a pit or a quarry.
Through your worship. So the mineral aggregate reserve designation is already on the property. The zoning amendment would bring the zoning layer into conformity with the official plan. In regards to the future establishment of an extractive use, there is a rigorous process under the Aggregate Resources Act that would have to be followed, and it would also require another zoning amendment to our zoning bylaw. So we would be going through a similar process as this evening, where there's a public meeting held in regards to the zoning bylaw amendment, but there are other, currently under the Aggregate Resources Act, there are other consultation processes that would have to happen under there. But it's not being contemplated in tonight's application. What the end result of the preservation zone would be is that it would eliminate, the future potential for a structure to be built within the reserve area that could be considered incompatible with the future extraction of the resource.
So this new severed lot is already in the mineral preservation, or would be in the mineral preservation area?
The lot to be severed would be within the hamlet boundary of Pelton's Corners and not within the mineral aggregate preservation zone.
So how much of this big piece of land is in the mineral preservation zone? I mean, I see the wetland that's in there, but
I don't have an exact number of acres as to what that would represent, but visually it looks about a third of the property when you consider the areas that are not included within the designation based on the size. I would need to use our measuring abilities on our GIS system to get that information.
okay.
And again, and sorry, through your worship, to Councillor Sullivan, further studies, should an applicant or an individual come forward to develop that resource, they would do their own ground truthing to determine the limits of where any viable resource would be. So just because it's shown on a map, it's just a general representation. Further studies would be required to determine the location and viability of that aggregate. And someone would do that due diligence as part of an aggregate application.
So if I can get in, so we have a property owner who wishes to sever land, right? And my understanding is the severance is to accommodate another residential dwelling. Is that the case?
That is correct.
Right. And so to that end, they have a large property they want to sever, and often when we see severances like this, it's to accommodate a family member, right, to facilitate another residential dwelling, right, so that they can make use of some of the additional lands they have, right?
Yep.
So with that in mind, I understand that the United Counties is saying, well, let's make sure that the zoning is now reflective of this mineral aggregate master plan that is part of what the province is requiring. I guess my question is, who would trigger if in fact the zoning is one of many, many preconditions for potential mineral extraction down the road, who triggers that? And is it the owner? Is that the only trigger would be the owner of the existing property? Should it stay in their hands? Where does the trigger for extraction come from? It would come from a private owner. We don't have any jurisdiction. The counties can't tell them to extract the mineral, right, or the possible aggregate. So I'm just curious to know, like, if you take this to its logical conclusion, where do we end up? And if the zoning is reflective or non-reflective of this understanding of where mineral aggregate resources lie, is it that relevant at the end of the day? Because I think what we understand is that there's an application to sever, and the severance is to accommodate another residential dwelling, and where people have large parcels of land in which to do that, I think it is usually our desire to make that happen, right? The complication here is that the counties has asked for a designation of some of those other lands, right, to better reflect mineral aggregate resources, and it seems to have created the perception, which is maybe real or maybe not, that this is sort of the gateway to some extraction or quarry down the road. And I guess I'm trying to figure out, where does this ultimately lead? Because I think we're, certainly myself, having navigated a lot of applications for severances, I think we tend to be supportive of additional residential units, especially on large parcels of land. So I feel a bit stuck in how to navigate this discussion because of what the counties is asking, and I don't know at what point updated zoning leads or does not lead to what I think many people in this room fear.
Yeah. So I'll address the first question is that how does someone establish that extractive activity? It's private, it's development driven. So it'd be a private development application that would come forward by a property owner or whoever owns the land at the time to establish that pit or quarry, and there would be an application through the Aggregate Resources Act as well as a zoning bylaw amendment, because that's, again, not an as-of-right use that would be established through the preservation zone. The official plan already designates it as mineral aggregate reserve. The zoning, in accordance with our policy, would update it so that it is reflective and matches the underlying land use designation in the official plan. So we're dealing again with kind of that 2-document concept, but the designation has of that property occurred back in 2018 with that mineral aggregate reserve. So we're not adding any new designations to the property, we're just catching the zoning up. So it just preserves and recognizes that there is a resource there, it's identified as being there, and preventing any future incompatible land uses from establishing itself within that reserve.
And incompatible would be, and then I'm going to go to Mr. Dyke, but to be clear, incompatible, I'm assuming, is largely residential or agricultural, right? Those are the incompatible uses?
So it would be so buildings, because then again, you're
Right.
putting something physical on the resource. But you're correct, residential is and aggregate operations are incompatible with each other.
Okay,
Yeah.
Mr. Dyke, did you want to add something?
Just want to add, Ms. Martin gave a very good explanation as to the process, but I think from a standpoint of, for your understanding, council's understanding, this does not make the aspect of developing a pit any easier.
Yeah.
Putting this only on property does not truncate any process, does not eliminate any requirements for public consultation, does not fast track anything in the process. It's simply, to Ms. Martin's point, as she very well explained, is it's the recognition in keeping with the PPS and the underlying official plan designation.
Right.
So it doesn't, for the residents in the area, it doesn't make it any easier for anybody to open a pit on that property. There's still quite a diligent process that has to be followed, including another rezoning, which would be after the very detailed consultation and process through the ministry with respect to the aggregate extraction piece.
Okay. So is there anyone from the audience, I understand the applicant isn't here, but is there anyone who wishes to put their concerns on the record? Okay, feel free to come down. Thank you. And if you could just state your name and address, that would be very helpful. Thank you. And you do need to turn on the mic. So if you could look for that red light, there you go. You're good.
Thanks. Jack Loft, and I live at 132 Sterling Crescent. You need anything else?
No.
Okay.
Nope, that works.
My only concern, I have a bunch of concerns, and I take note that Gary Dyke explains it well. It doesn't mean they're going to have a quarry right away, but it certainly gives them the right to start a process. My issue is that there's over 40 homeowners that aren't within the written notice requirement for this change that weren't notified. There should have been, and I understand by bylaw, there must be a sign on the property that gives people that may find some involvement a chance to research, to consult a lawyer, to decide whether they want to come to a meeting. That sign, if it was up, was not up for very long and was not in a position where we could read it. I pass that property and admire the property 6 times a day. And I was unable to see the sign at any time. Now, I understand Amy had mentioned that the sign may have been there at one time. Somebody else has mentioned that it was off the property sideways so we couldn't read it. At the very least, legally, we need notice. Those of us that did not get written notice have had 3 days of speaking to each other, meeting in confusion, to try and understand not just the process, but the future process that may impact on our properties and our property values. So I would ask the council seriously consider deferring this until we can have a better length of time to understand what's going on. Thanks.
Okay. And Amy, can you just speak to notice provisions? I know it's partly mandated by the province. I'm sure we can supplement it, so just to help us better understand.
Yeah, so thank you, Your Worship. So notification requirements under the planning regulations is notification to property owners within 120 meters of the subject lands. Notification was provided in accordance with the Planning Act. When you look at just where the boundary of the property is, it is likely, and it did happen, where there were residents who fell outside of that and wouldn't have gotten that written notification because you were outside of the 120 meter circulation requirements that are provided by the province.
So I would submit to you that there's a lot more property owners that will be impacted beyond that measurement. I also understand that there's a future amendment coming forward to council that will require a 500-meter zone. Is that correct?
Through Your Worship, so that's, you're alluding to the United Counties aggregate master plan. That's a document at the United Counties level that wouldn't be contemplated for decision here at the municipal level. It's a county document.
So we're not rushing this through so that we can get around that requirement?
No, there would be no implications of that 500. So the premise of that 500-meter setback was to provide a buffer around our settlement areas in regards to the establishment of certain aggregate resources. The outcome of this application, which is establishing the preservation zone, wouldn't be in conflict of those hypothetical policies. And I only say that because they haven't been adopted, so I can't adhere to the master plan at this time until the counties adopts such policies. But it's the preservation zone. There could be, and again, it wasn't contemplated because it wasn't the establishment of a pit or a quarry. Should those policies be in place, we would have to take a look at such an extractive application in light of any updated county policies at the time.
So, Madam Chair, I would ask again that this be deferred in that over 40 ratepayers could be impacted by a future use of this land. No doubt about it. If you're not going to preserve aggregates, I'm not sure why you're going to preserve them if you're not going to eventually extract them. So that could have influence on our properties. Now, there's 48 new homes there, and there's probably 5 or 6 along South Gore Road that are impacted by this. There's traffic issues, there's noise issues, there's dust issues, there's vibration issues, there's aquifer issues. We're all on wells. So we need a little bit more time. We were not given proper notice. Thank you.
Okay, thanks. Who else is wishing to speak?
Okay. So Diane Lapierre. And I live at 127 Sterling Crescent. So thank you, Council and Mayor, for the opportunity to address you this evening. And I would like to say thank you to Amy. She has been extremely cooperative and forthright in providing me with loads of documents and responses in a very timely manner. I first would like to second and support all of the comments made by my neighbor. I also have driven by the property a number of times looking for the public notice sign. I have found nothing. It is and we were all scrambling like crazy this weekend looking for information and resources. So it's a very complex matter, and we found it very difficult to try and inform ourselves properly and to know exactly what exactly was going on here. So I will bring back the aggregate mineral master plan. I realize it's a draft document. It is that is under consideration or under review at the United Counties level. But that plan does set a buffer of 500-meter buffer. Once that plan is adopted, my understanding is this revision, the rezoning, could not be done. it would then be exempt. It would fall under an area that is constrained and could not be rezoned as a mineral resource. So it leads me a little bit concerned about the steps that are being taken, because whoever did this study obviously had a reason for establishing this buffer. And it is something I believe council should certainly consider before rezoning that piece of.
Oh.
Did that go out? Were you?
Yeah.
Could you hear what I was saying? Am I
No,
going
we're good
for
now.
nothing?
Can I
It just went off? Okay.
Can I just clarify, if you don't mind? I'd just like to ask Ms. Martin, so because I sit at the county table, and I'm just curious, so the proposed master plan that is yet to be adopted by county council, does that 500-meter buffer impact future, I guess, designations or extractions moving forward, if that plan is to be adopted?
So I'm going to kind of explain it from my process perspective. So when the United Counties updates their land use schedules, we would be in a position where we need to update our land use schedules to conform to the United Counties official plan. So potentially it could alter where mineral aggregates are reserved. It could remove certain locations. It could add more to certain locations. It could. One of the things that the aggregate master plan is bringing in that has been pretty silent in the county's plan as well is bedrock resources. So there are, different implications as to what updating the schedules would mean. So in certain circumstances where there are the buffer area on the property, it could remove that potential designation, but the property is much deeper than 500 meters. So there would still be an area where there would be identified mineral aggregate preservation. I don't recall that the master plan removed the tertiary sand reserve completely from the property. It just created that 500-meter buffer from the settlement areas. So what would the impact be if it was adopted? Well, it would push out a little more from the property. I believe it's around 200 meters from the settlement boundary to where that resource starts. Gives you a little more of a buffer, but there would still be aggregate resources that would need to be preserved in accordance with our policies.
Okay, thank you. Carry on.
Okay. There's another document that caused me some concern, and that's the official plan. I looked at the Leeds Grenville as well as the North Grenville, North Grenville's master plan, and I'll quote a specific section here. You may wish to note that for your records here. So section 3.5.2.1. It speaks of the I will just read it, and then you could. So, in considering new mineral aggregate resource operations, or any expansion to an existing mineral aggregate resource operation, the counties and the local municipality will be satisfied that prior to approval of a local municipal official plan amendment, that the impacts are minimized with respect to the following. So it goes on a long list: surrounding lands, visual impacts, water, and all that. Very long list. I imagine most of you are familiar with that. The official plan is under review. A proposed new draft is up. The proposed draft will amend this paragraph to read, prior to approval of a local municipal official plan amendment and/or zoning law amendment that impact that the impacts are minimized. So it will, from what I understand, if the amendment to the official plan is adopted, any zoning bylaw amendment would then have to consider all of the potential impact before doing an amendment to a zoning. So I sort of question the timing of this amendment being put forward, considering the potential buffer that will be in place, considering that in the future zoning bylaw amendments may require a long list of considerations that may not be in place right now. So I would also ask that this, because of this, I cannot support this amendment, and I would also certainly ask that it be deferred for future considerations and research. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. So I'll just ask for any other comments. The gentleman, would you like to speak? Okay.
Hey, my name is Richard Lassard, 112 Sterling Crescent. I don't want to go over the same things that everyone's gone over because they're exactly the same concerns. But just to reiterate for you that what we just talked about in terms of the proposed draft at the county level, I think has proposals for a lot of safeguards, one might say. It can be improved in that it says, for example, the municipality will be satisfied. Well, one might ask, what does that mean, be satisfied? It doesn't put any onus to do a plan or to have studies done. It just will be satisfied. Well, that's you, so you would have to be satisfied. One would assume that the taxpayers would then be satisfied with the people that we elected. So, but it does talk about, as we stated, surrounding land use, mineral, water resources, noise pollution, et cetera, all of which you read in the letter that I wrote, and I wrote that before any of this came to light. I was trying to get information. Thank you to Amy, who I managed finally to get in touch with after a few tries. Not her fault, but she provided a lot of information on that. But I had put all these things in the letter I wrote basically as concerns that I thought the citizens of the area would be concerned about. Okay, and you have a copy of my letter. You all received it. Thank you again to Debbie Wilson, who is the only one who acknowledged it. But thank you, Debbie, for at least acknowledging it. I think, as the other two, this should be deferred. And it should be deferred until such time as the United Counties plan is adopted, at which point we could assume we're going to be consulted. Okay? As I say assume, because some of the comments you heard felt that the area to be included in consultation wasn't large enough. But we do have in the community an excellent organization that communicates with each other. A group of us met on the weekend and discussed these items, and you see us all here tonight. So hopefully you'll take note of that you have a group of very concerned citizens. So I'm requesting that council defer any decision on this. By the way, I'd like to go on record. I am not opposed to the owner of the land having a severance to build his house. This would be an advantage to our community to have another family present in our community. Is there another way to do that? That I can't answer. Amy can look into it. I am not opposed to that. I don't think that the members of our community that have met with me and have discussed things are opposed to the landowner having his severance and building his house. But designating it as mineral aggregate resource protection is, I think, one step closer to a future that it might be extracted and the impacts that might have on us. And without the county level document finalized, we don't have that support mechanism in place. We being the members of your taxpayers and the council as well, to say, no, we have this. We have a guide, and we don't have it. I think we're very fortunate that our mayor is also the county warden, so we have a little bit more input perhaps than someone else might have, and request to defer. Thank you.
Okay. Thank you very much. I certainly think the exercise at the counties in terms of the aggregate master plan was somewhat fraught. It's not obvious to us around the county's table when the master plan will be adopted. There's a lot of conversation to be had. So some of the mechanisms or safety nets that arguably are in there may or may not come to light anytime soon. It's hard to predict. But we appreciate your comments. I just wanted to ask Amy, was the aggregate designation that was formalized in the official plan in 2018, was there any recognition of those lands prior to 18?
Thank you, Your Worship. I would have to go back to previous iterations of the official plan and review
Right.
the schedules to see just the history, the evolution of the aggregate in that property. I wouldn't have that answer this evening.
Okay, so it would be a good question, because as Pelton's Corners was developed, I assume there was some familiarity or insight into potential surrounding land uses. That doesn't negate many of the comments this evening around process and how to engage moving forward. So I just wanted to know how we have understood the adjacent land uses. But I'll turn it over to the next gentleman. Welcome. Yeah, you got it.
Okay, got it. Chad Gibson, 123 Sterling Crescent. I just have 3 questions I wanted some clarification on. I've heard the word the province is recommending protecting the land. Is it a requirement to rezone it?
So the policies of the provincial policy statement require that municipalities do protect aggregate reserves where they are identified, and that trickles down through the county official plan and our official plan. So we do have policies that do require where there is reserve that we should be protecting it. Where it's identified, we should be recognizing its protection.
So is it a requirement to rezone it, or does this need to be protected from a building permit being pulled on it?
So the way that the policy reads is that, I don't have the official, I just have my snippet from the presentation. It states that where the lands within, that are designated as mineral aggregate are not zoned as such for a pit or quarry, they will be placed in an appropriate zone category, which will protect the lands from any incompatible land uses. I'd want to review the official plan policy to see if there's much stricter language around that, because again, I don't have it in front of me at this time. And the PPS requires that mineral aggregate resources shall be protected. So it is a requirement of the province that we do protect them. And it's a condition of the severance that the aggregate resources be preserved in accordance with the policies from the province down.
Okay, so that was my next question is the severance pending this rezoning?
Yeah, it is a condition of the severance, that's correct.
Okay. And my last question would be, if it isn't zoned mineral aggregate preservation, can a permit for a pit be requested if it's left agricultural?
Yes, so in accordance with the official plan, yes. Even if it's currently not zoned mineral aggregate preservation, an individual could make an application to establish a pit or a quarry, even if the zoning wasn't there. The official plan already recognizes that mineral aggregate resource, so the policies are already there that the extraction of the resource could potentially be supported because it's identified. But again, there are various studies and requirements and approvals that would be required from the Ministry of Natural Resources and Forestry, so provincial level, as well as another zoning bylaw amendment.
Okay, and my last question is, the dotted black line is the boundary for the wetlands, correct?
So not the boundary of the wetland, that is the 120 meter, it's considered an influence area, and typically within those areas, you would need an environmental study to determine what impacts development, any development would have on that natural environment.
Okay, so with a study and stuff, that boundary could be adjusted?
Yeah,
depending on the results?
Yeah, so everything would come out of the recommendation of an environmental impact study. There would be requirements to, one, delineate, ensuring that we're properly delineating the boundary of the wetland, and then establishing what are the environmental impacts. And then there would be recommendations made through that study if there could be a reduction within that 120 meters or if it needed to be maintained.
Okay. All right, thank you.
Is there anyone else who wishes to speak on the public record? Seeing anyone, Certainly, the applicant isn't here, and I do believe that it's always important to have the applicant in the room, especially if there's a lot of distress among residents or property owners in the surrounding area. So my personal reflection is perhaps a deferral would help to at least delineate some of the contemplations at the county level for what they are. I don't want to overplay that, and at the same time give us, through another meeting, an opportunity to hear directly from the applicant who isn't here today. So I recognize Councillor Strachan.
Thank you. Through you, Madam Mayor. I just have a couple of questions for Director Martin, just for clarification. One is regarding the notification. So I think I heard you say that proper notification was given to the folks within the 120 meters. The other point that was raised previously was about a public notice sign on the property. And I just would like some clarification as to what is required and what was put in place, please.
Through your worship, to Councillor Strachan. So in regards to placing signage on the property, it is a requirement of the planning regulations that a sign be posted on the property identifying that there is an application. There are no requirements in regards to size of the sign. We do a 11 by 17 sheet that is posted, and it has to be posted near the roadway where it can be viewed. There are no requirements into exactly where on the property it has to be located. In this case, signage was posted. It was posted near the residence that was existing, close to their driveway. So it would have been closer to the residence that's identified as 468 South Gore Drive. We do have, so staff did post the notice in accordance with the Planning Act, and unless we're notified otherwise, we don't unfortunately drive by every day to ensure that the sign is still up, but when we are notified, we do our best to get out there and to repost notice, but that's why it's also important for the mail circulation as well.
Okay, thank you. And just one more follow-up question. Understanding that the Ag Master Plan at the county's level is still under review and it will take some time, unsure of what the deadline will be there. Should the rezoning and the protections be put in place today or in the near future ahead of the master plan being completed, upon completion of that master plan, we would be required to revisit our own official plan and the designations as well. So if we were to say that, take it as is tonight, hypothetically, and then the counties comes with changes, we would have to revisit it. So the current change wouldn't be grandfathered, would it? That we would have to make some changes, or would it have some grandfathered position?
In relation to the application that's been made, just clarifying. Okay, so the policies that we have to consider are on the day that the application is deemed complete. So say tomorrow the counties, hypothetically, were to implement the changes in the aggregate master plan and bring in new policies. Those are not the policies I could consider because I'd have to go back to the date that the application was made. I can't then take those new policies because again, it's what in place at the time as to when it's deemed complete. So understanding the concern being raised by members of the community, I would still have to take consideration to existing county policies as they were when this was deemed complete.
So whatever is in place hypothetically tonight, if we were to decide to go forward with as it's been requested, then it would be the rules that are in place today and not in any future rules that would then be retroactive.
That's correct.
Thank you.
Okay, I see Councillor Wilson. I know Mr. Dyke wanted to say something, so, and then I have Councillor Sullivan. Go ahead, Mr. Dyke.
Thank you, Worship. Just to build again on Ms. Martin's points, and I think the important point is, and I fully appreciate the comments from the public with respect to the timing and deferrals, and with respect to the comments around the potential amendment to the county's plan. The important thing to keep in mind is the zoning being presented tonight because it doesn't allow the extraction itself, so it would require another amendment. So when the new county's policies come in place, they're applicable to that future amendment, right? So it's not an actual implementing zoning bylaw in the sense that it doesn't create a permissiveness whereby once it's passed, there's a permissiveness for them to do something. To answer one of the other questions, if the application, assume the zoning isn't passed, that doesn't preclude somebody from going in and applying for, getting into the process to get a permit to extract from the property. So it's not an implementing bylaw that council is used to putting in place where it actually creates the opportunity for a use. It truly is a preservation bylaw for future consideration. And if you were to draw an analogy for it, it's similar to when we put holding provisions on properties where we recognize a potential future use subject to fulfillment of certain conditions. And that's, I think it's an apt analogy for consideration is what it's doing. So the zoning doesn't allow anything to occur without the studies and considerations that the first gentleman brought forward: vibration, noise, dust, transportation, amount of extraction, water table impacts, assessment of, depending on the type of extraction, assessing on existing structures that could be impacted by the extractive use. All those things will be and have to be considered under the future processes, right? So just from a clarity standpoint, that's the nature of what this zoning bylaw does compared to a traditional zoning bylaw amendment.
Definitely, I think there is some confusion about the symbolic or real value in the suggested rezoning. So thank you, Mr. Dyke. I think that helps a little bit. So I have Councillor Wilson and Councillor O'Sullivan. Councillor Wilson?
Thank you. Through you, Your Worship, I would, after hearing some of the public comments and some of the comments within the group here, I would like to see a deferral on this. That's my opinion.
Okay. So you're moving a deferral, is that right?
Wouldn't we have to wait till Councillor O'Sullivan speaks, or?
Well, just because
I would move to deferral.
Indeed. So let's just see if there's a seconder, and then we can continue on with the discussion. Yes. We're in the public meeting. We're still in the public meeting.
With respect, Your Worship, if you entertain a motion to deferral, you don't entertain any further discussion on it other than the deferral.
Indeed. Okay. So let's hold that for a sec. We'll hear from Councillor Sullivan. We'll close the public meeting, and then you can move the deferral, Councillor Wilson, formally. Councillor O'Sullivan, please.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you to Director Martin. I have a couple of questions. Unfortunately, there isn't a legend on this map, so what exactly is the blank area on this lot of land?
So that would be the agricultural designation.
Okay, so there's no mineral aggregate preservation under that? It's just that area that's got the legend, the marks on it?
Yeah, the circular marking. So that's where the official plan mapping has identified the potential for aggregate resources. So just it's confined to that area. Future studies could be undertaken to further define that by somebody who would be looking to develop that resource.
Okay. Thank you. And all the land to the east, then on the other side of South Gore Drive with the same legend, is that subject to preservation as well?
I would need to review the zoning layer to determine if those are under mineral aggregate preservation. There are mineral aggregate preservation lands within the area.
But it's the same legend, so I kind of...
Sorry. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, sorry. So Mr. Mosher has so kindly pulled up our GIS layer for me. And so the lands that are on the east side of the property of South Gore Drive are currently zoned mineral aggregate preservation. So the zoning exists in the area currently.
Okay. So it's definitely much less preserved aggregate on this particular piece of land?
That is correct.
Okay. Well, I don't know if you want a seconder for because I think I would like to understand a little more, and I certainly empathize with the people, and I commend them all for doing pretty diligent homework in a short period of time and getting all the information you could get. And if I had just invested a lot of money in a home, I wouldn't want a quarry. So I can appreciate your concerns, and I'd like to say that I think you're going to be fine, but I want to be sure myself. So I would second Councillor Wilson's motion for deferral until we can all get more information and find out a little more about the county amendments.
Okay, so I'll go back to Councillor Wilson shortly. So we're going to close the public meeting. I'm going to hear from Mr. Dyke. I'm assuming no one else wishes to speak on the record this evening? Don't see anyone? Okay, so over to Mr. Dyke, and then I'll close the meeting.
Just process standpoint, so now dealing with the deferral, so it's dealing with time and place for the deferral.
Yes, indeed. I certainly think at this stage that we'd need a couple of months for clarity of communications and further discernment. Councillor O'Sullivan?
Sorry, one thing that I neglected to mention is, I wonder and this would be to, I guess, Director Martin, is there any way that the applicant could get his severance to proceed with building his home if we do the deferral tonight? Assuming we do the deferral.
If you make a deferral on the decision, on this matter, it wouldn't satisfy the condition of the severance. So it needs to go forward, but I would want to speak with the counties as to how we can address it.
So I'm going to recognize Mr. Dyke, Councillor Barclay, then I'm closing the public meeting, and we're going to deal with the pending motion to defer. Okay, Mr. Dyke.
I would just, the only thing I was going to mention was a question from Ms. Martin about the ability to request an amendment to the conditions of approval for the consent that would modify the requirement to rezoning if there's an alternative zoning, notwithstanding the protectiveness of the current one that's being asked for. And also my only question was with respect to where are they in the timeline for fulfillment of conditions of consent?
They've got adequate time to fill the consent. The decision was provided in 2022, and there's a 2-year timeline to satisfy the condition.
Okay. Councillor Barclay, and then I'm wrapping this up.
I just wanted to make sure that I could speak to the motion.
Okay, well, the motion's yet not on the table. Okay, so we're closing the public meeting. I see no other comments forthcoming. Public meeting is closed at, lost track of time, 8:21. So I'll go back to Councillor Wilson. Councillor Wilson, I understand that you are now moving a deferral of the decision this evening. Is that correct? And we're going to give ourselves a minimum of 60 days.
That's correct.
Okay, and Councillor Sullivan, you'll second. Councillor Barclay, go ahead.
Thank you very much, Madam Mayor. This is a comment on the deferral. I hear the concerns of the residents, and it's been a lot of information for them to absorb, let alone understand, because it is rather confusing. But that the rezoning that's on the table that we're considering deferring doesn't open the door an iota towards a pit being established down the road. They would still, as been said tonight, they would still have to go through a very rigorous process. There would have to be a public meeting. So what's on the table tonight does not open the door to a pit being established in any way. Now, that could be argued, I suspect, and I think the residents are putting some comfort in the fact.
Sorry, Councillor Barclay, I just for a point of order, through the worship, there's a motion for deferral on the floor, and the matter of debate is only on time and place on the deferral, not the merits of the deferral. Yeah.
So that was my inquiry before we closed the meeting, that I wanted to speak to the deferral.
Gotcha. Right. I guess speaking to the deferral has its constraints in ways that we didn't understand. To that end, I think your comments, I think you can oppose the deferral and provide rationale once the meeting has closed. If you oppose the deferral, obviously this discussion will come back to this body for further consideration. So I regret, Councillor Barclay, I wasn't aware of the constraints around how we debate the deferral, so I apologize for that. It is what it is at this stage. I'm assuming that your comments were leading to opposition to the deferral. Is that correct?
Not necessarily, but I did want to speak to the faint hope that this county's aggregate extension would offer some comfort to them, and I don't think it does.
And so is your question about, or your concern about the fate of that county's aggregate master plan?
And what it means in terms of a future bid.
Indeed. Okay. So obviously, I think that is actually something that needs to be contemplated moving forward. I can tell you, I've sat around the county table well before being warden. We've been part of the discussion. That master plan is in real flux in ways that will perhaps undermine what you think future mechanisms could be to protect or provide more mitigation measures when it comes to aggregate resource development in the future. And in fact, if the counties doesn't adopt a plan, the province will impose one. So there's no out here. The province is extremely clear that it wants master plans. Every county has to adopt or to engage expertise outside of itself to look in a very scientific and comprehensive way on what potentially could represent aggregate in the future. So I guess to your point, Councillor Barclay, I think that discussion around county's aggregate master plan is a bit fraught, quite frankly, and it may not provide faint hope. That being said, I think I've now veered outside of the deferral constraints. We have a motion for deferral on the table. It is seconded. Is there any other comment on the deferral in terms of time and place, i.e. we've said 60 days? Any opposition to that? Seeing none, I will call the vote. All in favor of the deferral, raise your hands. Okay, so we have a deferral. I know that there are people here for the next discussion, which is Equinel, and we will get there, but we will need to take 10 minutes. Thank you. We're going to get started, colleagues. I think we've taken more time than the allocated 10 minutes, but I think we all needed it. So please take your seats if you can. I'm just going to ask Megan. Yes, thank you. Perfect. So I believe in the agenda that we are now moving on to the Dundas Agri Holdings. And I'll turn it over. No, I have to. This is the meeting. I need to do this, right? This demands a public hearing. Amy? Yes. Okay. So with that in mind, we'll move on. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application to permit the rezoning of a portion of the property located on County Road 18. That's the one we're talking about. Legally described as Concession 4, part of Lot 20, Geographic Township of Oxford and Rideau, from rural zone to rural exception zone, to add additional commercial uses, including commercial garage, equipment sales, rental. Advise that this meeting is obviously your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns. And if an appellant does not provide comments at this public meeting or written submissions before council makes a decision, the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider objections. Please provide your name, address, and postal code following adjournment of this public meeting if you have concerns. And if you do wish to come to the mic, you do need to identify yourself. Is there anyone here for this meeting? Okay. And is the applicant here? Applicant and concerned resident, is that correct? Okay. So we'll turn it over to Ms. Martin, and then we'll open the floor to the applicant and any members of the public. Go ahead, Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. We'll just wait for the slide deck to come up. I'll proceed in light of not having the slide deck. Very grateful I printed mine this evening. I'll just continue with the presentation. We won't have the benefit of the map for the general public, but hopefully it'll be up shortly. So the proposed zoning amendment being considered tonight is for Dundas Agri. So there are a series of severances that occurred on the property recently, and one of which would sever off a 1.67 acre parcel of land. So the zoning being considered tonight has no bearing on the severance itself. It was not a condition of severance. Rather, it's an ask of the property owner to rezone the lands to add some additional uses associated with the existing business on the property. So as you'll see, so there's the property as it sits on County Road 18. It's on the north side. That's Abbott Road to the north. And then you see the rail line there that intersects County Road 18. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the site plan. So the portion of the land we're considering tonight is at the very bottom right-hand corner of the sketch that's provided. So the sketch was provided as part of the severance application to demonstrate how the land was being just reconfigured. There were some lot additions that were occurring and the severing off of the agribusiness. Next slide, please. So I already spoke to the slide, and I just wanted to mention that surrounding land uses include agriculture and rural residential land uses. Next slide, please. So staff undertook a policy review of the application in light of our provincial policy statement, and the policies that do apply provide that healthy, integrated, and viable rural areas should be supported by building upon rural character and leveraging rural amenities and assets and promoting diversification of the economic base and employment opportunities through goods and services, and on rural lands, development that is compatible with the rural landscape and can be sustained by rural service levels should be promoted. And that development should also be appropriate for the infrastructure that is in place. Next slide, please. I apologize, it is very dense on the slide. So in regards to the United Counties official plan, development is on rural lands are limited to development that is compatible with the rural landscape and should be appropriate for the infrastructure which is planned or available. Then the counties also establishes that our local municipal official plans should have policies in regards to rural industrial commercial uses, and they provide a variety of policy considerations that need to be considered within local official plans. If we'll go to the next slide, please. Our own official plan is supportive of rural, commercial, and industrial uses. The use must be appropriate for the proposed location and be compatible with surrounding land uses. Access to uses will be carefully controlled in order to avoid creating any traffic hazard. There is an existing access to this property. The use shall be appropriately screened and buffered. Adequate off-street parking and loading spaces will be provided. Advertising, signage, and outdoor storage of goods and materials will be appropriately controlled. The use will be placed in a separate category in the zoning bylaw, and development on the lot would be subject to site plan control. Next slide, please. So the proposed amendment would put the 1.67 acre portion of land into a rural exception zone, which would allow for the addition of 3 additional uses on this property, which would include a commercial garage, equipment sales and rental repair, and contractor's yard and workshop. Next slide, please. The municipality did not receive any submissions from the public in regards to this application at this time or prior to the report being published. Next slide, please. And the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority did not have any objections to the amendment. Next slide, please. So it is staff's recommendation that the zoning bylaw amendment be supported to add the additional uses, being a commercial use, which is including a commercial garage, equipment sales and rental repair, and a contractor's yard and workshop. And that concludes my presentation. Should council have any questions, I am available to take them, and the property owner is also present this evening.
Okay, is there anything the applicant wishes to add before I turn it to council or the applicant's representative? Okay, excellent. And I'll then turn it to members of the public. Would the member of the public like to add anything? Okay, come on down, please.
Good evening, Mayor and Council. My name's Gordon Gregg. I'm at 2010 Abbott Road. I'm just behind the property that's being discussed tonight. My opposition, not necessarily opposition, but concerns about the property is this said property has been operating and has been built for 4 or 5 years without this zoning, and it's been running as a business that way. I know some of the land has been severed, and that's probably part of the reason for some of the rezoning. Back in April of 22, I received a bunch of paperwork from the counties with all the rezoning of the land back there. And I've noticed that the lot size and plan does not match the severance from that United Counties. That was showing that property being 2 acres. I know sometimes we say plus or minus, but 1/3 of an acre is a fair bit of difference. What I guess I'm opposed to is an expanding business that was previously just rural land when we moved to our property, and we've been in our house for a little over 10 years now. I know this business is into earth moving and heavy equipment, and we don't want to see the work yard being turned into a parking lot of heavy equipment. I suppose some of my opposition can be removed if there was some kind of barrier between, a visual barrier between my property and that workshop, perhaps a tree line or something as such, but that's all I have to say about that.
So, Ms. Martin, can you speak to the discrepancy in land parcels, the 1.7 versus 2 acres, and could you also respond, or perhaps the applicant can, to a proposed visual barrier between properties?
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So severances being a county process, there is, and I would have to go back to what the original sketch looked like. It is a proposed concept, as a survey typically isn't drafted until such a time a decision's been made. So I'm not certain if just the representation that was provided originally and the rough measurements given did differ by 0.3 of an acre from what the surveyor ended up going out and surveying. I know from time to time that the numbers do fluctuate based on on-site factors, but I'm not really privy to the details as to why there's such a discrepancy from what was originally provided in the severance application versus what the final survey came out with. And in regards to the second piece, site plan control would be applicable, and we could work, so outdoor storage typically is required to have some sort of fence, but certainly something we could talk to the property owner with about creating some visual barriers to help address any visual impact.
And at what stage would that be done? Because we're being asked to consider your recommendation this evening, so to give comfort to a neighboring property, how would that work?
It would be through site plan control.
Okay. And is it a commitment that can be made this evening? Is it something that is practical for the applicant to do?
Thank you, Your Worship. So our official plan policy does require it when establishing rural commercial uses. So it is a requirement that that site plan control would be required.
Okay. And is it a reasonable request to impose a visual barrier? Does that make sense?
Yep, and it's something that we've done with other commercial type operations.
Right. Okay. It seems like a practical way to alleviate some of your concerns. Is that right?
That would work for me, yeah.
Okay, excellent. Okay. So I'll just look, there's no one else who wishes to speak to this amendment, is that correct? Or apologies, to this proposed amendment during the hearing? Seeing none. I'll go to council colleagues. Any other comments or questions here? So we move forward with a recommendation. Can we do so with the expectation that that visual barrier be enacted? How do we ensure that that happens?
So that would be through staff at the site plan control process. So staff have made note that it is a desire that there be a visual barrier, which I would assume would be at the rear of the property line, because Abbott Road would be north.
Yeah, I would suspect either at the north side of his property, the 1.67 acres would probably be easiest, I would think.
Yep.
But, because that property is separate, although I think he owns the land, the 30, 40 acres between my property and his shop. I believe he's the landowner of that land too.
I believe so. I believe they actively farm the land and behind as well.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay.
So I think at the back of his shop property would be.
Okay. Well, we'll just ask Mr. Gillies to come on down. Thank you.
Luke Galenzi, 2068 County Road 18. I'm the applicant. Just to shed a little light on this, the whole point of the severances was to preserve the 40-acre farmland from ever having the ability to get subdivided.
Okay.
I live across the road. My mother lives next to the shop. My brother lives back on the land. You know, we consider it an area we're very proud of and want to preserve the look, so I can appreciate what you're going for. The heavy equipment business is going under, by the way. So every piece of equipment you see is for sale. But our agribusiness is healthy, and we maintain some of our own vehicles in the shop. But as far as a visual barrier, I'm not sure what the shop itself is 20 feet high or 19 feet high. To hide that could be tricky. But I do have 200 sugar maples in a little nursery that are slowly getting put around the property because I want to preserve that look that's in that bush all along the west side. That is gorgeous. And we fixed up the old barn, and so I don't know if that's any reassurance to you at all, but
that could possibly work. We could talk.
Right.
After.
Okay, no problem. Because I know you have some in the back of your property
working
as well.
it out. It's amazing.
Exactly.
Yeah, okay.
Who needs counsel?
Yeah, really.
Yeah.
We're ready
Sorry,
to go
Your Worship,
home.
yes.
We're ready to go home. Please send us home and you work it out. Yeah.
All right, thank you.
Okay. Okay. Thank you, Mr. Galenzi, for coming down and offering some additional information, which I think is enlightening. Okay. Excellent. You can just come over here into my chair, and I'll go home and put the kids to bed. It's good. Okay, thank you. What's your first name again? Gordon. Thank you, Gordon, for being here. So then we'll, I think in the absence of other comments, we can go straight to the recommendation, and that is that I've closed the public meeting. Closing. Okay. That council approve and enact bylaw 0523 to permit the rezoning of a portion of the property located at County Road 18, legally described as Concession 4, part of Lot 20, Geographic Township of Oxford on Rideau, from rural zone to rural exception, to add additional commercial uses, including garage, equipment sales, rental repair, contractor's yard, and workshop. So can I have a mover and seconder, please? Thank you, Councillor Strachian, Councillor Sullivan. And I will look to any comments or questions on the motion, colleagues. Seeing none, I'll call the vote. All in favor? Good. Okay, that carries. Thank you. And let the goodwill of neighbors prevail. So we'll move on then. I recognize it's late. It's 8:55. A number of people have been very, very patient as we get to Equinel Phase 6. So we'll go as far as we can this evening. We may not do justice to this discussion, just given the hour, but we'll let Ms. Martin do her. I guess we're going to open the public meeting, and then we'll do the presentation and see where we get. So we are now holding a public meeting to consider an application to amend the zoning of the lands known as Concessions 1 and 2, part of Lot 25, former township of Oxford on Rideau, from tourist commercial C7 and rural zones to residential third density, exception 22, tourist commercial, institutional, and environmental protection zones. This meeting is obviously your opportunity to voice any objections or concerns you may have. You must do so during the public meeting or provide written submissions, or it is possible the Ontario Land Tribunal may refuse to consider any objections. Please provide, obviously, name, address, and postal code to the Director of Planning for further follow-up. And if you have a question, you do have to come down, obviously, to the mic and provide identifying information at this time. So I assume the remaining members in the audience are here for this meeting. Okay, good. A number of you are here, so I'll pass it over to Ms. Martin.
Thank you, Your Worship. If we'll just go to the next slide, please. So the image before you is just an aerial image of the property. It shows the existing golf course, and overlaid you will see what is considered the proposed Phase 2H, which are the lands that are on my map to the top left, and then the bulk of the remaining lands are considered Phase 6. If you go to the next slide. This is the proposed development plan. It shows you the breakdown of the locations of the single detached lots and the townhouse lots, including which would be considered bungalow townhouses, which are the brownish color of the blocks, and then the two-story towns, which are the pinkish colored blocks. Some property details, if we go to the next slide. The property is 25.6 hectares in size. Phase 6 will see the creation of 203 new residential units, 143 single detached, and 60 townhouse units. And Phase 2H, which was originally included as part of another phase of the Equinel development, but approvals had lapsed, will be developed with 25 residential units. There is a proposal for a 1.81 acre park at the corner of Black Horse Drive and Equinel. There's also a 30-meter buffer that will be established from the wetland in the southern portion of the development. And I do note that there will be a road crossing over Settlers Trail. Next slide, please. Planning staff reviewed our provincial policy statement and do provide some supportive policies in regard to residential development in general. So there's various sections of the provincial policy statement which speaks to supporting residential development within our settlement areas where it can be accommodated on municipal servicing. It encourages affordable housing and including providing housing for low and moderate income households. The provincial policy statement also encourages healthy and active communities through active transportation and community connectivity, including the provision of parklands. As well, Section 1.6 of the provincial policy statement addresses water and sanitary and stormwater management facilities that are required for new developments. When staff reviewed the provincial policy statement, it was found that the proposal generally met the intent of the provincial policy statement. Next slide, please. In regards to the United Counties official plan, there are a variety of policies in regards to development and growth management, which includes directing development to our settlement areas. Policies in regards to our settlement areas include cost-effective development patterns and supporting a range of densities and mix of housing types. There's a provision in the county's OP that addresses affordable housing policies and encourages a housing target of 25% of new development be affordable. And then Section 4 provides policies for the protection of natural heritage resources. So it was generally found that the intent of the United Counties official plan was being maintained with the proposed development. Next slide, please. Our own official plan establishes further policies in quite much more detail than the provincial policy statement and the United Counties official plan. And I'll do my best to summarize, because there are many policies that do apply. So again, in a similar fashion, growth is directed towards our settlement areas. And again, the effective use of land when it comes to our municipal services, including our water, wastewater, and stormwater services. And then our official plan also provides policies for our natural heritage areas and the evaluation of wetlands. Next slide, please. Since the property is located within the urban service area of Kemptville, we looked at our urban service policies as it pertained to residential uses. And there are a variety of policies that speak to providing a choice of dwelling types, supporting the distribution of dwelling types through zoning, directing expansion of development to areas that are appropriate based on a variety of factors, including availability of municipal services and environmental constraints, minimizing the potential for land use compatibility problems, which may result from an inappropriate mix of housing densities, and supporting the provision of services and amenities that enhance the quality of the residential environment. Next slide, please. There's also a specific policy in our official plan as it relates to Equinel, which caps the development to a maximum number of dwelling units just over 1,100. The specific policies were provided within the council report. There are also policies that speak to housing. In regards to our housing policy, where development is to occur on a site containing 2 hectares or more of developable land, a minimum of 30% of new residential units are to be planned in forms other than single detached dwellings. So there are townhouse units that are being contemplated. And then a municipality shall endeavor to have across the municipality at a minimum and on an annual basis 25% of all new residential development affordable. So residential development applications will be evaluated using, among other factors, this affordable housing percentage. And then in regards to just our review, it was found that the application was in general conformity with our official plan policies. Next slide, please. So tonight, our meeting is twofold. One, it's to consider the merits of the plan of subdivision. No draft conditions are being presented to council tonight. It's to hear input and feedback from members of the public in regards to the plan of subdivision. There's also a request for a zoning bylaw amendment, and because they are concurrent applications, we do combine the public meetings into one. So the zoning bylaw amendment that is being requested would accommodate minor boundary changes with the golf course lands and Phase 6, in the Phase 6 development, and that's to provide for a better lot fabric layout. It's also to amend in an additional zoning provision, and it's just related to encroachments of porches, balconies, and steps that would allow them to project in to the side yard setback slightly. If we go to the next slide, you'll see the proposed zoning bylaw amendment that was provided by Novatech. And it just shows where those land swaps would happen with the golf course and which lands will be rezoned to the R3 22 zone, which would permit up to townhouse dwellings to be constructed. There are no proposed zoning changes to Phase 2H. Next slide, please. Municipal staff felt it was important to highlight a few of the items in regards to Phase 6, and I thought it was important to just identify that Settlers Trail is a valued community resource. And so Phase 6 of the Equinel development will intersect Settlers Trail, and this would allow for the orderly development of about 40 lots on the south side of the trail. I also just wanted to note that our municipality's transportation master plan identifies the road allowance on which Settlers Trail is constructed upon as a future potential roadway. The conversion of Settlers Trail is not contemplated within this development whatsoever. The trail will remain with Phase 6 being developed. A road widening to the unopened road allowance would be provided from the lands within Phase 6. So where the proposed roadway and Settlers Trail will intersect, a pedestrian crossing could be installed. Additional measures will be addressed at the detailed design, which could include narrowing of the road and additional vegetative planting and landscaping closer to the road. And typically, what we see is the developer and the municipality work quite closely on these detailed designs to ensure that the appropriate measures are taken in relation to road crossings, especially at through our trail networks or other multi-use paths. Next slide, please. And again, this is just a representation of the concept plan, which shows you where the location of the Settlers Trail is, which is on the, unfortunately, it's not a north-facing map, but the right side, you'll see that unopened road allowance, that is Settlers Trail. Next slide, please. In regards to affordable housing, Phase 5 of the development saw the introduction of a pre-designed model, which included a secondary unit within a single detached dwelling. In Phase 6, Equinel has further pre-designed a model that includes a secondary dwelling unit that can be accommodated on lots that are 37 feet wide and 50 feet wide. This represents about just under 30% of the lots that would be for sale within the Equinel development. And then in the planning rationale, it was provided by Novatech that it is recognized that Equinel, being a master plan community centered around a championship quality golf course, presents marketing limitations for accommodating traditional forms of affordable housing. Accordingly, in conjunction with a range of housing products, including provisions for accommodating additional units throughout Phase 6, EQ Homes partnership and investment in Kemptville Quarters is considered an important component in delivering affordable housing options to the local housing market. And that's the Habitat for Humanity project that's happening in Kemptville. Next slide, please. In regards to interconnectivity, Phase 6 provides a future opportunity to connect into what will be Phase 2 of the Oxford Village subdivision. There are 2 points of connectivity into the neighboring property, one at the end of Equinel Drive and Sentosa Street. 1-foot reserves will be placed at the end of each of these roads until such a time that future development applications come forward for the development of the land adjacent. A sidewalk is also to be provided on Equinel Drive on the east side, connecting into the existing sidewalk network within previous phases of the development. At this time, there are no pathway connections into the Settlers Grant subdivision. Next slide, please. So Regional Group retained the services of GemTech to ground truth and map out the wetland located on the southern portion of the development. This built off the Niblett study that the municipality had commissioned back in 2019. And GemTech used the Ontario Wetland Evaluation Survey, which is a provincially established survey to help further establish the wetland boundaries. So the methodology had been reviewed by technical experts at the Rideau Valley Conservation Authority and were found satisfactory. The 30-meter setback is required from the established wetland boundary, which restricts development. So none of the lots will project into that 30-meter buffer, and that buffer will be around the wetland will be preserved to further protect it. Next slide, please. So the next 3 slides provide the public comments that have been received to date. I'll provide kind of just more of the high level of what we received from which individuals. There are a lot of overlapping themes in regards to the comments that were received. So from Mr. and Mrs. McKenna, we received concerns about the impact of the townhouse units that were proposed for behind their property, and impact on the rural estate subdivision lots, questions related to stormwater management, grading and drainage, landscaping and buffering, what are private recourses, whether it's damage to private property during construction, impacted tree roots for trees on private property, and concerns regarding construction practices. We received an email from a Ms. Lamadela and Mr. Miller that had requested denial of the application. They raised concerns regarding the loss to forest and vegetation, and that the remaining woodlands on the property should be preserved. They had concerns in regard to the impact of Settlers Trail, concerns about one point of access through Equinel Drive, and the oversaturation of multi-residential dwellings. Ms. Hosey provided questions related to stormwater management and grading and drainage. She inquired about capacity of our wastewater and water systems to accommodate this growth, and the questions were also raised around how we define affordability. She also raised concerns in regards to the impact of Settlers Trail and tree conservation impacts. Ms. Garrity provided comments in opposition to the proposed development, stressed the importance of green space, and concerns were provided over introducing a vehicular crossing over Settlers Trail. The LA Group provided a letter where it wants the municipality to ensure the development of this phase considers connectivity to their lands, which it does. Mr. Byveld's provided a comment where he requests that when work begins on the subdivision, that the neighboring property owners in Settlers Grant are consulted before trees are removed. Mr. Cannon asked that the municipality provide comments to the counties with reference to the municipality's 25% affordable housing policy, and had requested that a holding symbol be implemented to address the subdivision agreement, to address that through the subdivision agreement, the provision of affordable housing is addressed. And we received comments from Ms. Main where she was concerned in regards to impacts to Settlers Trail. If we advance the slides, one more. One thing I wanted to point out was some of the impacts that were made from comments that had been received when the original notice of plan of subdivision was circulated by the United Counties. So Regional Group and Novatech did hold an in-person meeting with many of the residents whose properties in Settlers Trail back onto phase 6 of the development. And their planning staff were also in attendance to hear the concerns and the response from Regional Group and Novatech. Comments provided through the meeting included concerns over the number of townhouse units set back onto the residents in Settlers Grant, impact on the trail network, drainage and stormwater management, impact on vegetation, and had asked that there be some additional landscaping around certain blocks. So through the comments that were received from members of the public, the draft plan of subdivision has been updated, which significantly reduces the number of townhouse units located along Settlers Grant. They went from being multiple blocks of two-story towns to being, I believe, 1 or 2 blocks of townhouse bungalows. Trying to mitigate the impact of that density change to the existing neighborhood in Settlers Grant. A lot of the items that were addressed, especially earlier on in the circulation process, have been addressed to the residents directly by Regional Group and Novatech, as well as the counties and the municipality where appropriate. And additional concerns that have been raised more recently through the circulation of the zoning amendment notification in the public meeting have been provided to Regional Group for their consideration, as well as the United Counties. Next slide, please. So we did receive agency comments in relation to the development. This includes Enbridge, where they require that easements be provided to service the development. Canada Post provided comments on the location of community mailboxes and requested to be notified when the first foundation is installed and the expectation of first occupancy. The Rideau Valley Conservation Authority has provided their own written comments, which are being addressed by the developer. The RVCA will submit their own draft conditions in regard to the development of subdivision, and the municipality has provided written comments to the developer as part of the review process. And at a later date, municipal staff will bring forward draft plan conditions for council's consideration once review comments are satisfied. Next slide, please. I always like to include multiple copies of the map because I find after a lengthy presentation, the image that you want most is often located at the front. So I do apologize that you're seeing the same slide again. Next slide, please. And it is staff's recommendation that council receive the report titled Plan of Subdivision for information purposes. Comments that are provided in regards to the Plan of Subdivision will be provided, tonight will be provided to the United Counties, and it is staff's recommendation that council approve and enact a zoning bylaw amendment to rezone the lands to residential third density 22 and tourist commercial institutional and environmental protection zones as outlined on the zoning map. And again, that's just some readjustments that are happening with the golf course lands. To that end, that ends my presentation. Thank you for your patience. There's a lot of information. I'm here to take questions. I do note that representatives from Regional Group and Novatech are also in the room tonight to address more questions that might pertain to the development.
Okay, thank you. So council colleagues, I just think that at this stage of the game, maybe we hear from members of the public who may have questions in regards to the presentation, and then we can go to the applicant for any other questions that we might have. So if you wish to speak, this is a public hearing, so it's important that you put your comments on the record. Come on down. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councillors. Mary Alice Hosey. I live at 33 Heritage Boulevard in Settlers Grant. I'm the house on the corner with the entrance to the nature path in front of us and then heading down the nature path beside us. So we're right at the corner there. And actually, Ms. Martin, presentation answered some of my questions, and I would like to state that we had meetings with Equinel about this, the people who were impacted on this subdivision, and they were very productive meetings, I feel, especially as we've seen that they took one of the suggestions and switched things around, which makes us feel like they were really listening to us. First, of course, obviously, I'm on the nature path, and I find it a highly used path, and you did answer most of those questions in that. We're just wondering about the impact during construction. Will the path have to be closed down? Because that's quite a huge chunk of the pathway that will be impacted by lots of equipment and heavy movements. So will that imply that that's like the path will have to be closed during the construction?
Why don't you provide all the questions, and then we'll have the applicant, or Ms. Martin, come, and we can get the clarification you need, and we might need as well.
Yes, and we've all been here quite a long time. And we did ask about trees. I did get a reply from Equinel in relation to trees along the property line, which will be severely impacted. And because of the nature of the open hardwood forest behind us, we have a lot of older trees that are very large and right along the property line. So when Equinel comes in to remove the entire forest behind us, that will impact soil compaction and damage to roots of these larger trees. And I'm talking about 3 or 4 people along there, are concerned that the damage to those larger trees will then eventually cause them to die. And because of the way the wind comes in our subdivision, that will direct it directly onto the Equinel houses. So Equinel has said they're going to try to place a berm. We're not quite sure what that actually means in terms of what's happening. And so we still have concerns about the death of those trees. Like, we're going to have to see, maybe perhaps take them down ourselves, or is there a way that Equinel would be comfortable, because we did bring this up, if we know they're coming in and our tree is right on the property line, and we give approval, would Equinel take that tree when they were removing all the rest of the trees because it's already open? That was just a suggestion, and I'm not sure what the liabilities would be involved in that. I see that there's a notice there that there's a potential of a road coming through down from Oxford Village across to Settlers Grant.
It's a potential.
In the near
It's
future.
not a reality.
It's not a
been
reality.
flagged.
Yes, because I had asked about the nature path being eventually turned into a road, but we've invested so much in that nature path. So, I mean, I know that may be a possibility, but nothing we can do about that. And I do have a question about noise. I'm not sure, but if they're going to be building all of this, it'll take a couple years. Is there a noise bylaw in place regarding how they start? Because usually they start between 6 and 7 in the morning and they go till 7 at night. And we notice they also work on Saturdays and Sundays. So it means that behind us, we will have 6.5 units being built right behind us. It's going to be very noisy for all the time. So, and other than that, I mean, they did listen to us, and so we were very pleased about that.
Okay. We appreciate you coming. Thank you for your comments. Others that want to speak on the record before we turn it back to the developer? Thank you.
Good evening. I know it's late, so I'll keep this short. My name is John Dixon. I live at 50 Settlers Way. And I appreciate the amount of time that's gone into working on the proposal. One thing I didn't hear mentioned was, I guess we must live close to, but farther away from the notice area, because we didn't receive any notice of anything, so I'm coming to this party a little bit late, just heard about this meeting recently. One thing I am concerned about, though, that affects all of us in Settlers Grant is the, and maybe it's been addressed, but the effect on, with the Oxford subdivision going in as well. It's a lot of new building that's going on. I'm concerned about how it may affect the aquifers. We've lived in our house for, well, north of 20 years. And we've never had a problem with water, and maybe there is no problem here either, but I would like some kind of an assurance to know what effect, if any, there would be on the water in our area. And I see it was mentioned, but I know there are a number of questions that were raised from public comment. I'm just wondering, prior to going ahead with the approval here, will those questions be answered? And perhaps they have been. As I said, I'm coming to this a little bit late. So if there is additional material, I'd certainly like to see it. But I'm just wondering about getting all those answers to those questions that are there. So thank you.
Thanks for your time. Others that wish to speak on the public record? Okay. Colleagues, with your indulgence, if someone wishes to come forward, there's still time to do so, but maybe we could ask the applicant and representatives from Econel to respond to some of the questions that were raised, potential disruptions to the path, the establishment of a berm, what would that look like, trees on property lines and how those would be treated. We have seen that trees often are imperiled, even if they're not taken down, with the removal of adjacent trees because it compromises the ecosystem. I think it's a fair request to ask Econel to consider the reality that those trees often don't survive. So is there a way to collaborate with landowners? Noise bylaw for construction, Ms. Martin, I think you can handle that. And the status of the aquifer as it relates to not just Econel, but Oxford Village. I know you have lots of information, or maybe Ms. Dunlop, who's here this evening, can speak to the condition of our aquifers in light of some of this proposed development. So we'll have you take the first three. Thank you. And if you could just restate your name.
Sure. Good evening. My name's Steve Pence. I'm a planning consultant with Novatech. I had a part in preparing the application, so I'm here tonight with my colleagues, Melanie Riddell from Novatech as well, and with a representative from Regional Group, Steph Kaminsky. So they're both here tonight to help answer questions that deserve answers. So first off, I guess these applications, I just wanted to say, were filed in 2021, and since that time, we've done lots of work to collaborate with the municipality in developing a refined plan. We've worked closely with the Conservation Authority to address technical comments, and we've also, Regional has worked very closely with some of the abutting landowners to give some assurances and to explain some of the project details to try and help answer some of those questions. So I think we've come a long way in the initial submission to bring something forward that we think really sort of balances the interests in advancing the municipal objectives for growth and development of this community. I would say that this is essentially the last phase within Econel. It's phase 6 at the sort of south end, and it's been on the sort of books for a number of years, right from the inception of the Econel community. And so it really is an implementation of the policies that are entrenched in the official plan about how this planned community is to develop over time. It talked about phasing, it talked about environmental protection, talked about housing affordability, all those sorts of things, and we feel that this plan does exactly all that. The questions that are presented tonight are all legitimate questions, and collectively, my colleagues and I will try to answer those questions. Some of them are more technical in nature that I'll probably defer to Melanie as an engineer in the group. I'm happy to answer any planning questions that might be posed, and my associate here, colleague here, Stephanie, can answer any sort of developer-related questions about commitments to tree protection and some of those things that are more sort of appropriately addressed by the applicant themselves. So if you guys want to join me up here, I'm not sure if I can remember all those questions off. I tried to take some notes when I was sitting at the back.
For sure. So I think the questions, as I understand them, were disruptions to the path during development, given how well utilized Settlers Trail is, and I think we've all had multiple experiences on that trail and understand how coveted and cherished it is. And so I think the question is, do you foresee significant disruption of use of that section of trail as you're developing in and around it? The other question was on the status of a berm and protection of trees that are on property lines that are likely to not survive with the removal of adjacent trees on your property. We also have some other questions around noise, aquifers, but we'll take those in-house, so maybe you could tackle those first three.
You can start if you want to.
Hello, everyone. I'm Stephanie Kaminsky. I'm representing Regional Group, the developer on this file. Thank you, first of all, for listening to us today. Your first question about closing the path during construction, I'll just start off by saying Phase 6 is a very large phase. There's quite a number of units, and we will be sub-phasing the development of Phase 6, and we are looking at starting construction initially with the area that's basically shown at the center of the plan that's on the screen right now. And so the development closer to Settlers Trail would be coming at a later date. In terms of tree removal and tree retention, I know obviously to permit development we do need to remove trees on site, but we are very conscious of trees along property lines and trees next to adjacent property owners. And we did commit to providing a 1 to 3 meter buffer along the property line between our development and Settlers Grant in order to try and preserve the trees as much as possible on our side of the property as well as along the property line. And we worked very closely with the homeowners at Settlers Grant that back onto Phase 4BC, which is just north or on the left side of the plan showing on the screen right now, to make sure that if any damage happened to any trees on their property line, that we would either compensate them for that damage or we would work with them to find an appropriate solution. And we plan on doing the same thing with the residents in Settlers Grant that back onto Phase 6 here as well. So we are committed to providing that buffer where possible, and that will be determined through our detailed design process as well, which is coming after this step in the planning process.
And do you have confirmation that that buffer is adequate to preserve some of the trees on either your side or the adjacent properties?
And I mean, I am not an arborist, I'm definitely not a specialist, but I can confirm that trying to provide at least a 2 to 3 meter buffer at least gives us a large amount of reassurance that those trees will survive. And again, in the event that there is, significant damage that's caused to a tree on an adjacent property, we would, deal with that property owner and make sure that we address that appropriately in the event that that happens.
Okay, thanks.
And I would just add to the tree protection measures, when they get put in place, it's about not just protecting the trees that you want to remain, it's about making sure that there's enough best management practices put in place during construction so that those trees that do stay in place or intended to stay in place will survive the construction as well. So that's an important aspect of the conservation plan.
Okay. Okay. I think those were the questions at this stage. Did I miss anyone, colleagues? Okay, go ahead.
Through you, Madam Mayor, regarding the trail closure, I don't think that was fully answered. So when you're going to the later phase, understanding that that's not going to happen right away, is there a way to avoid the trail closure? Because it is a very important connector between Settlers Grant and so on to get to County Road 44 and beyond.
I can try to answer that question. Like with any development project that involves construction, there's a construction management plan that typically has to be put in place to ensure that ongoing operations in the area can continue while construction happens. So there would be some thought put towards how can that trail function safely and still provide user functionality during construction. I don't know what that construction is going to look like, but if there's safety measures need to be put in place, that's something that certainly would be part of that construction management plan to ensure the safety and to ensure that that the trail doesn't get destroyed as a result of works being done. So that's the kind of thing that I feel could be addressed through a appropriately worded condition of draft approval. Mm-hmm. And I would see that would be a reasonable way to make sure that that's accounted for to address the comment.
Thank you.
Okay, so in terms of aquifers and water supply quality, Director Dunlop, do you want to speak to that?
Certainly, Madam Mayor. Thank you for the question. In regard to the aquifer, all the residents on Settlers are on private service. Equinel is served by the municipal water system. There should be no direct impact whatsoever in regards to the private services to the public services as per Equinel. But I may note that Oxford Village, which is just south of this site, is putting in a new municipal well. As part of that municipal well, many studies were completed in regards to the impact of the aquifer, as well as the level of the aquifer. So the level of the aquifer is much deeper than the ones that should be serving all the homes within Settlers, which are rural and private service based. The Ministry of the Environment reviews and provides the permit before that well can be activated and commissioned. So those studies have already been completed. So there should be no impact on the aquifer for the Settlers Grant subdivision.
Okay, so that's on availability of water, and believe me, Mr. Dixon, we've had lots of conversations as we had to contemplate the Oxford Village subdivision on water quality, the health and abundance of water, and the impact of another well on both private and municipally operated wells. And I think I can say with some degree of confidence, given all of the information that's been provided, is I don't think we're imperiling the status of the aquifers, given the independent environmental assessments that were exhaustive and were subject to Ministry of Environment approval, much removed from this council table. So it was a very rigorous process. In terms of the potential possible conversion of Settlers Trail into a roadway, Ms. Dunlop, do you want to just speak to that? I understand that that is not a reality. It was identified as a possibility depending on the future trajectory of development. I take some comfort from obviously what Ms. Martin has said, that this proposed development in no way presumes or creates an imperative for the loss of Settlers Trail, quite the opposite. But you obviously were quite involved in the development of the master transportation plan, so perhaps you can speak a little more.
Certainly, Your Worship. So in regards to the Transportation Master Plan, it was commissioned in 2019. It does identify that this is a long-term proposal for a connection, an east-west connection between County Road 44 and actually Muldoon Road. It is estimated to be about $7.8 million in 2019, but it has never been approved as a construction directive from Council. It is a long-term, greater than 10 years from that 2019 date, to be a transportation connection. So in the interim, of course, it is a lovely nature trail, and that is the intent in that term to remain as that function.
Okay, so I think in summary, while it was identified as potentially a crucial route in the future, I don't think this council or the municipality is bound to pursue it as such. It really is at the discretion of this or future councils to contemplate some of that road connectivity, depending on the amount of development and I think the appetite of North Grenville 10 years, 20 years down the road. So I think that covers off all the questions except noise. Do you want to just speak to construction, and then I'll recognize, I think, another resident wishes to speak. So noise bylaw when it comes to construction, Amy?
Yeah. So the municipality does have a noise bylaw that would regulate construction noise. So there would be a complaint process should they be operating and creating noise outside of the hours within the bylaw. And I believe the times slightly differ from Monday to Friday versus weekends. But I can provide that to Ms. Hosey if she would like.
Okay. So I think I'd like to recognize another resident who wishes to speak. Is that right? This is the public hearing, so might as well avail of it. So welcome. And then we'll do another round with council and the applicants if there are no more public comments, and then move to recommendations. Go ahead. Thank you.
Hi there. Ann Jusso, 23 Garrison Drive. Apologies, this is my first time in a forum such as this, and I understand that this is sort of a minor minutia kind of a discussion. I'm more interested in the major, big picture appetite for kind of discussion, and maybe this is not the venue for that. But my concern is that these things come up and we get glimmers of them in the public, in the wider community, if we live close enough, or if we're directly impacted enough. But I think there needs to be a bigger discussion about an appetite for a major change, like getting rid of the Settlers Trail or turning it into a road, before it comes to a motion before council. And I don't know how that I get involved in that aside from running for council. But I feel like there is a lot of appetite, but that people are just not aware of what's going on and are not part of these decisions.
So maybe I could ask Director Dunlop or Ms. Barton, what is the, moving into the future on something like a master transportation plan, how would a change of that nature take place, and what are the mechanisms by which, that would be contemplated?
Certainly, Your Worship. So a master plan document is a very high-level conceptual plan. It is something that looks forward to what the future may hold, not what it will hold. So the idea is that should, in 10 years plus, from the 2019 council wish to move that forward, it would become a public process to move it through what's called a municipal class EA process to convert it from what it is now to a fully functioning road, which is something the developers have to go through for their subdivision. So a similar process. It would have to have a public engagement process as well as come back to council before there's even consideration of moving it into the detailed design or construction or tender phase. So there would be, again, a public process. It would be put in the local newspaper, we put on the municipal website. Would there be a door-to-door notice? That is not something that is typically undertaken under the municipal class EA, but it is advertised, and we try to get it out to as many members of the broader general public because it impacts such a broad base.
I believe that a number stated earlier was 120 meters.
You're talking about for notice provisions?
Earlier on in one of the other things.
Yes.
That, when we have these large rural properties, that seems like not very many people impacted. So that's not a very wide net being cast and not very many people being informed.
Right, and you're talking about notice provisions when it comes to impacts of neighboring developments. I think that's the notice provision that prevails, right, or that the province stipulates when there's changes to adjacent developments. But I think what I'm hearing from Director Dunlop, for any major change to a piece of infrastructure, a natural asset in our community, certainly I think would be the desire of this council. I actually expect this would not happen in the lifespan of this council, but down the road, there would be a far more robust engagement exercise, public engagement exercise with the community on the conversion of a natural asset such as that.
If I may, Madam Mayor?
Yeah.
The Planning Act has a specific requirement regards to notification, as well as North Grenville Planning Department has a specific requirement. This is not a Planning Act function. Mm-hmm. This is a conceptual master plan, which is recognized under the municipal class environmental assessment process. So there are different communication levels. There's the notice provision under the Planning Act and their processes, but from the municipal class EA process, it is a newspaper. It is a notice of commencement of project. It identifies what the project is, so that the idea is that we're not just getting Settlers Grant, but we're getting Tanager Woods. We're getting all the subdivisions within North Grenville. We put it out on social media. We try to get as much notice and engagement with all of North Grenville, not just the pocket that a specific planning application may affect, because it is a broader, larger style project. Hopefully that answers the question.
I think, just to be clear though, this particular proposed subdivision within Equinel, really the crossing of Settlers Trail as a consequence of this development does not in any way predetermine the outcome or the fate of Settlers Trail, right? My understanding is that if we are to approve moving forward with this phase of Equinel, it in no way suggests that down the road there's any certainty of losing Settlers Trail in its entirety. That's a totally different proposition, and I don't want to speak for other council colleagues, but obviously I think it's something that we would take very seriously if it was even presented to us. So I just want to be clear that that is correct. Amy or Karen, can you confirm that, please?
Well, I'll answer on our both behalfs. Madam Mayor, both the Planning Department and the Public Works Department, in consultation with the engineers, the developers, etc., the preservation of this trail is absolutely included in all our discussions. Right. It is not something that will be, yes, there will be construction impacts, as you can see the proximity of a crossing the trail, but the intent is to preserve and to reinstate whatever disruptions and probable improvements to that trail as we go through the process, as Amy identified earlier in regards to potentially localized plantings.
Okay, thank you. Okay, perfect. Okay, any other questions from the public? Yep, come on down. Welcome.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, councilors. I just have one concern and one question. Were there any consideration given to any endangered species that are located on those lands? And my second concern or hope is that I'm worried that the difference in crossing Highway 44 from the trail over across is much different than what the construction zone is going to be as to the people who use it. The Settlers Trail, in between the house, and behind the houses, is very heavily used by children. I'm worried through the construction phase, will that particular aspect be held higher than usual because of the fact that kids will be kids? Crossing the highway is one thing, which most of them would never be alone, but riding that trail on a daily basis without fail, there are children, sometimes very small children, that are out having fun on that trail that will not have construction on the top of their mind as they're going through on their bikes and having fun. And then afterwards, I have full confidence that there will probably be flashing lights and all the things that we've seen on other things, but I'm just worried that there won't be a sufficient amount of thought given to who actually uses that particular segment of the trail compared to other trails that are within Kempo.
Yeah, it's a fair comment.
Thank you, Mayor.
I don't know if Equinel or Ms. Dunlop would like to speak to how we sort of manage that reality. I hear what you're saying in terms of usage and the demographics and the youth that are very much drawn, right, I think, to the safety considerations of that trail, and their parents feel comfortable letting them go out on their bikes and run around and are not really thinking about car traffic or potential collisions. So perhaps we can start with Mr. Pence. Do you have any comments, Mr. Pence, or Ms. Dunlop? I think you have to come to the mic so you can be on the record. Thank you.
Hi there. I'll start with the easy question first. That was the question about the endangered species.
Yes.
Certainly, as part of the due diligence and supporting studies that were submitted with the application, there was an environmental impact study done, and that looked at a whole host of natural heritage considerations, which included an endangered species assessment. So, and it included a number of recommendations for species. I can't think off the top of my head what was found, but certainly those are requirements of the developer to adhere to the Endangered Species Act, so rest assured that those will be taken into consideration. The second question about the trail, and certainly I agree with you, Madam Chair, it's a very valid question. What I would say is that safety and usability of the trail is of paramount interest to everybody. And through the detailed design, there will be lots of consideration given to what that safety features, elements, functional design needs to be incorporated into the design to make sure that it is used or safely used by all segments of the society or of the community, because we want to ensure that we have a pedestrian-friendly, active transportation community, which includes children right through to people that are in their later years. And so I don't know what that design will look like, but I can tell you that through the detailed process, there'll be lots of consultation between our Novatech engineering staff and the municipality to come up with a design that works for the community.
Okay.
Does that help?
Okay, are there any other comments from the public before I turn it back to council? Yes, Ms. Martin, go ahead.
Madam Mayor, just for the record, can the gentleman just state his name and his address? Thanks.
Hi, sorry about that. It's Mike Amiro, and I live at 90 Settlers Way here in Kemptville.
Sorry about that, Mike. I should have caught that. It's okay. Okay, it's 9:46, colleagues. I think it's we're all waning a little bit, but I'm gonna just call for any other comments. We are still in the public hearing portion of the meeting. Anyone else wish to state their concerns on the record? Seeing anything? Anyone? Okay, so then I'll turn it back to council for any further comments or considerations, and I'll consider the public meeting closed, but the council discussion can absolutely continue. So I'll recognize Councillor Sullivan first.
Thank you, Madam Mayor, and through you, I guess to Director Martin and perhaps Director Dunlop as well. I certainly support connectivity between Oxford Village and Equinel with respect to active transportation, but I'm not in favor of roadways that are connecting. I think that would just encourage people to take shortcuts. And I don't believe that this residential area is designed for traffic that would go from Oxford Village right through to County Road 44, rather than, I think they should be using either 43 or 44. So I'm not in favor of connections for vehicle traffic. And I think if we have, just looking at this potential future Oxford Village subdivision, it appears that there would be roads connecting, and therefore it just sets up encouraging people to drive straight through to get over to 44. And I know of one area where I lived, actually in Ottawa, where it was specifically, there was only access off of Maryville Road. It did not connect over to Maitland for that very reason, and that was the fairly large area called Central Park. And I listened to a lot of consultation regarding traffic studies and traffic patterns and driver habits. And so I would be concerned. I think absolutely active transportation connection, sure, for sure, but I would not want to see two vehicle roadways across Settlers Trail, because I think it's just going to create a big traffic mess in two residential areas that would be highly residential with children and parks, and so I'm concerned about that.
Okay, any other comments from council? Council Brockley?
Yeah, I have a slightly different take on the concern that my council colleague brought to your attention. And I would just say that, you know, in terms of connectivity between the southern development, I guess, and the rest of the development, I mean, when it comes to emergency vehicles and fire, I think it's important to have at least one connection. I would question the second connection, which is off of Equinell Drive that's proposed for Oxford Village. I think, you know, the other connection, Sentosa Street, I mean, is valid. I wouldn't want to landlock that portion until Oxford Village is built out. And, you know, in terms of connectivity, it's very important. And I think, you know, having two connections to Oxford Village means there's two crossings of Settlers Trail. And I know there are plans to have a PXO, I believe, to enable residents to use the trail, crossing that, I guess it's, I can't read it, Muirfield Drive connection to Sentosa. I see that as one crossing that I think I'm comfortable with, given that there's allowance for pedestrian traffic along the trail. The second point I wanted to make, it's come up about construction interfering with pedestrians on Settlers Trail, and this is a comment, and I'm not a planner or a builder, but I'm looking at the townhomes that back on, I guess, to Settlers Trail. If that could be one of the, I know you're phasing phase 6, if that could be part of the final phase, people using Settlers Trail could use Muirfield Drive to get around. I don't know if the street would be built prior to, I assume it would be built prior to the construction of those townhomes that are back onto Settlers Trail. But it's just an idea. I don't know if it's workable or not. And those are my only comments. Thanks.
Okay, I'll recognize Councillor Strakian.
Through you, Madam Mayor, I don't have any questions. I just wanted to add a couple of comments from my perspective. I agree connectivity is important, and I think one of the examples that we have here with Settlers Trail is just how what was envisioned previously as a road allowance and how over time the use changes and what becomes a very important part to the community. So I think Settlers Trail is hopefully something that we can protect and future councils will be able to protect as well. Safety concerns, I think, are the biggest ones that I'm hearing right now, not just during, you know, in future once the roads are in place, or only one road, hopefully, and, you know, once there's lights and so on in place, but during the construction phase. And, you know, I think we can't undermine that aspect of it. It's a heavily used trail, and folks have become very used to the ease with which children can make their way from those neighborhoods to County Road 44, where there's a multi-use path, and, you know, Kemptville Public School and so on. So I think, you know, we need to make sure that that is paramount, and I think you've heard that this evening from the residents. You're hearing it from us as well, that really needs to be at the forefront in these further discussions as the construction starts. Ms. Gesso, and looking in my emails just to find some information on Settlers Trail and so on, because we've had discussions in the past. I actually came across an exchange of emails that we had not too long ago, and I hear your points about the communication piece. I think we heard it before about the zoning side of things. There are all sorts of different communications aspects that we're continuing to work on from a municipality as a whole, and certainly things like this where there's a holistic perspective that isn't just about the neighbors in the vicinity, but there's more neighborhoods that are impacted by it, I think. that is important, and I know that the effort is made to make sure that communication is put in there in the papers and so on, but sometimes things don't get picked up by the residents or don't get communicated in the way that we would like to see. But I think that there are lots of different ways for you to be, and other residents to be engaged in, future planning and bigger picture items as well. So I just wanted to recognize that aspect as well. Thank you.
And I would add there are several municipal advisory committees, including the Environmental Action Committee. That would be an important space, the Active Transportation Committee, where some of these things would likely emerge if there were significant changes. So those are great spaces to be in because they do allow for sustained engagement with municipal staff and council and other colleagues. So that application deadline, I think, is still open until Monday or the 26th. So should anyone listening or in the audience have a strong interest to be a participant in a municipal advisory committee, it's, I think, an excellent way to have your ear to the ground. Okay, so I'm not seeing else. It's 9:54 p.m., colleagues, so we can just receive this report. We don't actually even need to consider the bylaw amendments this evening. Of course, I defer to you. I'm recognizing the hour, and obviously what our obligation this evening to do was to hold the public meeting as it was advertised and to hear from residents in our community, and of course Equinel, who's gone through, I think, considerable effort to certainly do their best to be a responsible developer. But I leave it to you whether or not we just want to receive the report as it is and return to the question of the comprehensive zoning bylaw. But certainly that's what's before us right now. We're perilously close to hitting a curfew for council at 10:30, and I don't think any of us wants to be here 30 minutes from now. So I leave it to someone to move a motion to receive and proceed with a recommendation, or just to receive and defer any rezoning until we have another meeting.
I have an appetite to pass the zoning part of this particular project.
Okay, well, if it's up to council colleagues to
Well, then
move.
I would move that we receive and approve the bylaw amendment for this development.
And so that is, your motion, Councillor Barclay, is that council approve and enact bylaw 0623 to amend the comprehensive zoning bylaw 5012 to amend the zoning of the lands to rural zones, residential third density exception 22, tourist commercial 7, C7, institutional and environmental protection zones.
That's correct.
Okay. All right. Do I have a seconder for that motion? We would need a seconder. Okay. Councillor Strachan. Okay. So any comments on the motion? My question then is really around accountability. I think I think the discussion around this particular phase of Equinel has raised all kinds of concerns, not just on the direct impacts of this phase, but on some of the other pieces we've talked about. So what is the mechanisms by which council and the community can remain vigilant and engaged in the discussion? Because I think that's what we're hearing online and through lots of resident communications, is that sometimes they're feeling surprised or taken aback or unaware, and it creates mistrust between council and the community, or mistrust between council and staff or council and the developers. So by rezoning these lands, if that is in fact the appetite of council, I don't want to lose the opportunity for sustained engagement. So maybe Ms. Martin, you can tackle that first.
Yes, thank you, Your Worship. So we still have to present draft conditions to council. That would be then forwarded on to the United Counties for their consideration, as they're the approval authority for plans of subdivisions. So to that end, we still have that draft plan approval process that we have to provide the draft conditions through. And as Mr. Pence mentioned a few times this evening, some of the items that were raised from a concern perspective, we could address through some more fulsome draft conditions that would have to be considered prior to the plan of subdivision being registered.
Okay, and the particularities around the crossing at the Settlers Grant Trail, how will discernment and specificity be articulated back to council or the community when it comes to those particular plans?
and Director Dunlap can jump in as appropriate. So the municipal staff will draft conditions for the plan of subdivision regarding those specific topics. And one of the provisions could be that a fulsome communication plan be developed as well, in particular around development of the trail network. Again, conditions of draft approval that we could provide, but as well working with the developer as a way of one, how do we ensure that proper communication is going out more so on the construction side when that activity is happening, to ensure that residents are aware of timing and that proper measures are being taken to provide safety and proper fencing off of the area.
Okay, and you're saying that that can be encapsulated in a draft, condition of the subdivision proceeding. Is that correct? And that would come back to council, or does that remain the purview of staff?
Draft conditions would require council approval.
Okay, so that becomes the forum. I guess what I heard tonight is it's not just about communication, it's about engaging the families and residents who use the trail. Because if they have perspectives on how the trail is used that could help inform the plan for construction, then it would be good to have that conversation about how do you shape a construction schedule, or how do you even communicate to the community writ large or to those impacted neighborhoods, Equinell or Settlers Grant, so that it's not a top-down process, because that's what I'm hearing. If you have 10-year-old kids on the trail, I bet you want to talk to their families before you even embark upon a construction plan. So that piece is something that isn't obvious to me in terms of, how do we move forward together as a community to better anticipate patterns of use and work with Equinell should this trail crossing come to pass, so that it's, the plan is really grounded in the actual ways in which the trail is used by a myriad of different demographics, young, old, in between. So that's what I would like to see, right? I would like to see some of that conversation. I don't know how that happens, but I think it would be an important element of moving forward. Councillor Barclay?
Yeah, just as the mover of the motion, we're dealing with zoning, and my understanding is that little bits of the golf course are being rezoned one way. There was an earlier slide that had a lot of red dots and stuff. They're just accommodating this plan in terms of zoning.
Yes.
So, my understanding is we'll have an opportunity to address the concerns that you've expressed so well, and I don't know if we're going there? No. Okay. But, my understanding, it's little bits and pieces that have to be rezoned in order to accommodate
I
this
understand
concept.
that, but we're also having a public meeting where we've heard lots of concerns from residents, and while it may be a little bit independent or a lot independent of zoning, I think it still bears repeating that I think if we are sincere in our efforts to hear from and engage with the community when there are disruptions or changes to how particular natural assets are being used, that we do need a sustained engagement piece. And sometimes I feel a little bit frustrated that if all we're focused on is communications, we've missed a step, and that is true dialogue with those individuals and families that are using those assets. So that's what I'm asking for. So when those draft conditions come back, I hope it reflects dialogue that's been had, with the community writ large, and maybe that can happen through the Environmental Action, Committee or the Active Transportation Committee, where there's another space for some robust engagement. I'll recognize Councillor Tracan.
Madam Mayor, I guess directly to you and to the rest of council, I think that we can do both. We can move forward with this zoning bylaw amendment request and at the same time make a commitment to that ongoing engagement.
Yes. And I'm not speaking against the motion, but I just want to be clear about how I've understood the value of the meeting this evening and the extensive dialogue we've seen online and with each of us individually and collectively. But I'm done now. So if there are no other comments, I will call the question. All in favor? I think we had a seconder we had a seconder, right, in Councillor Strachan. Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor, please. Okay. So that passes. Thank you to Equinell and to the many residents who are here this evening. I think that, colleagues, I would suggest we move quickly to other business. We entertain, I think, what is a motion from Councillor Barkley around BIA appointments. Ms. Martin, I think you'll understand that I don't think we have the headspace to receive your report on Bill C-23, but is there another matter we're missing?
Yes, Your Worship, there is a housekeeping bylaw amendment. I'm sure Mr. Mosher can keep it very short and simple. It is an advertised public meeting, so I'd recommend that if we're going to consider one matter, that would be the matter we consider.
Okay, thank you very much. And is this another public meeting that I'm missing?
Yep.
Okay. Council will now hold a public meeting to consider an application of a housekeeping amendment for the municipality's comprehensive zoning bylaw to amend various provisions of the existing bylaw. There is no one left, so I'm not going to read the rest of this text. Anyone wishing to ask a question during the meeting can do so by coming down to the mic. I don't expect that will be the case. Is there anyone left for the public meeting in regards to this particular housekeeping amendment? I see no one. Over to you, Amy.
Thank you, Your Worship. Next slide, please, Megan. So from time to time, we identify that there's errors, omissions, oversights, duplicate definitions within the comprehensive zoning bylaw. Staff have identified a total of 3 proposed amendments. One is related to lot coverage in recently developed subdivisions where there are stormwater management systems that can handle an increase in stormwater management. The second is related to a duplicate definition of derelict vehicle. And the third is in relation to air conditioning units, which are currently not allowed to project into interior side yards. So staff is recommending that they now be allowed to project into those interior side yards. If we go to the next slide, please. The increased lot coverage would affect the Equinell, Forest Creek, and Pine Hill Road subdivisions. Through consultation with Public Works, those have been understood to be ones that can handle an increase in lot coverage. Currently, lot coverage is sitting around 40–45%. Through direction from Council, there's been a lot of discussion about increasing or decreasing the amount of variance applications for lot coverage. So these are ones where staff's recommending that they go up to 50% in those 3 subdivisions. Next slide, please. That shows the Equinell subdivision, the Forest Creek subdivision, the Pine Hill Road. Next slide, please. We have two definitions of derelict vehicles. So it's always problematic from an enforcement perspective to have that. So we recommend removing 5.78 and consolidating that into the definition of 5.302. We've consulted with Jeff Baribeau, Manager of Bylaw Services. He's had input into this, and we have collaborated on this definition here. Next slide, please. And then just in terms of air conditioning units, we continue to have enforcement issues with them. Notably, there was one complaint that came forward in the Equinell subdivision in 2022. We asked staff to investigate how many air conditioning units project into the side yard illegally, and there was on that particular visit 36 of them. So it's a problematic bylaw the way it's worded. So staff's just proposing to say that they can project into interior side yards and then be done with that as a enforcement matter. Next slide, please. We got a couple of general inquiries from the public regarding this application. Other than that, a letter of correspondence from the regional group expressing support for the changes proposing lot coverage. That concludes my report. Happy to answer questions.
Does this increase resident conflict to, expand lot coverage?
I don't know if I can answer that question fully. I really don't. What we tried to do is say, like, where are the areas where you can have an increase in lot coverage? Where do the stormwater systems handle it? There's still side yard setbacks, rear yard setbacks, other setbacks that apply to development. What we have been seeing, generally speaking, is that people want a slightly bigger deck or they want a detached garage and they're just tripping lot coverage. And so generally those don't lead to conflicts as long as the structures themselves are fully compliant with the zoning bylaws. So it's a hard question to answer. Will it lead to more conflict? As long as people are following the rules, I don't think it should.
Okay. We call them housekeeping bylaws, but they still have implications. And we're in a public hearing moment where we're supposed to do our due diligence, right? To reflect on the impact. So I guess from my perspective, like these are questions that emerge for me in contemplating the consequences. They seem very practical and pragmatic, and I understand all of that, but sometimes there are unintended consequences. So I guess I just wanted to raise it. Councillor Barkley?
Just to follow up on your concerns is, I was prompted to talk to Deputy Director Mosher after one meeting where someone wanted to expand their deck. And I said, can we not have a comprehensive change to the bylaw? So I was really addressing those kind of very minor, I guess it's not a minor variance, but yeah, an adjustment to accommodate decks. So does it increase more conflict? It might. The other comment I wanted to make is just confirmation that we're not looking at potential lot increases at this point in time for the older sections of town where increasing lot coverage would facilitate intensification, residential intensifications, because we don't have a firm grasp on, we haven't got a stormwater master plan, we don't have a firm grasp on the older infrastructure and how much lot coverage we could accommodate through stormwater management.
So are you commenting on why, are you asking a question? Are you
I just
seeking
want
clarity?
Oh, yeah, just clarity that, once again, it was clear to me in reading it that we're not talking about Old Town Kemptville.
Is that correct, Mr. Mosher?
Yeah, there was a thought process we went through. Originally, staff was deciding, through the direction council had provided, are we looking at general increase in lot coverage across North Grenville?
Right.
And through consultation with Public Works and other staff, it was determined that that would not be prudent. We don't have that information to back up within Old Town Kemptville, as Councillor Barclay said, an increase at this time. Through the Stormwater Master Plan, we may be able to get that information to say, yeah, you could increase it across the board, but we don't have that information today, so therefore, staff's recommendation was just for 3 recent subdivisions where we're finding a volume of applications that is becoming problematic.
Okay. Okay, any other comments on the housekeeping bylaws? In terms of derelict vehicles, I noted that antique vehicles were sort of exempt, but only if they were stored indoors. I'm just curious, is that a significant shift from how we've treated those vehicles in the past?
No, that's not a significant shift. The 2 definitions themselves were almost identical.
Okay.
So no, it is not.
Okay, so is there any significant shift in that definition of derelict vehicles?
There's a combination of the 2 in terms of what's required to understand if a vehicle is derelict. It's does it have current plates on it, and does it have current registration? Those are the 2 things. So in speaking with Jeff, and he's a former career, he said those are the 2 things we really need to have in there from a derelict vehicle perspective. So nothing's being taken away. If anything, it's just being added to.
Right, but do those changes have implications for residents in the community?
They only have implications for people who would have a derelict vehicle on their property.
So you have to have current license plate?
Yeah, you have to have current
registration?
license plate and registration in order for it to not be a derelict vehicle. It has to have been there for if it's less than 30 days in one location, it's not derelict. If it's after 30 days and meets those other criteria, it's now derelict. And then bylaw could respond to a complaint if it's received.
Okay, and is that a significant shift?
It is not.
Okay, all right. Okay, anything else, colleagues, on these housekeeping? No? Okay, then I'll look to a mover and a seconder, please. Councillor Barclay, do I have a seconder? Councillor Wilson? Okay. And I'm sorry, I don't have the motion in front of me anymore. Perhaps one of you could read it, or at least summarize that we are addressing 3 different housekeeping matters. Is that correct, Mr. Mosher?
Yeah, I don't have it in front of me either, but yes, it's 3. It's general lot increase in specific zone categories. They are the Equinell, Forest Creek, and Pine Hill subdivisions. Deletion of 1 definition of derelict vehicle with 1 minor change to the remaining definition, and allowing for air conditioning units to project into interior side yards.
Perfect. Thank you for that summary. Colleagues, if there are no other questions, I'll call the vote. Okay. Thank you. And then we'll go quickly to, I think, Councillor Barclay, you have a motion in regards to other BIA appointments?
The motion's coming from the BIA, and
Yes.
it's been sent to the clerk, and so
Okay,
should
I'm not
be
sure
in
clerk
front
is
of you.
here this evening. Could we just name the individuals, please?
Oh, sure.
Okay.
Shelley Mitchell
Yes,
and Sierra Jones Martell
and
are
they're to
being
be
asked.
named to the BIA board
They're to be appointed by council to the board
as
via
per
a
the
motion.
recommendations of the BIA.
Via a motion by the board, the current board
Okay.
of the BIA.
Okay, so then, are you moving that then? Can I have a seconder, please? Okay, Councillor Strakian. And is there any comments or questions, colleagues, on that? Okay, I think it's a sensible way to proceed. I understand that it has the BIA's endorsement, so I'll call the question. All in favor? Good. All right. I would strongly suggest we not go into closed this evening. We'll have to defer that discussion to another time, and we will, yes, Councillor Strakian.
I know that we are deferring Bill 23 again.
Yes.
I think the question that I have is how do we want to proceed with this to make sure that we don't continue to add it to the end of some of our longer meetings? How much time is required for you to fully explain this to us? I think Director Martin, sorry, through you, Madam Mayor. I know we'll have questions, but your presentation on its own, it would be good to give enough time for it and make sure that it is captured sooner than later.
I think a walkthrough of the presentation as presented would take me around 10 to 15 minutes, but I 100% fully anticipate there are a lot of questions in relation to that.
Okay. I think we're looking at 30 to 45 minutes to do justice to your report. So I guess we'll have to give consideration to when we can bring it back and put it on the front end. And maybe it's not a planning meeting, maybe it's a council meeting. Maybe that's the way to do it. These seem to be a little less heavily packed these days. Okay, so Mr. Dyke did remind me we do need to move a deferral to receive that report. So Councillor Strakian and Councillor Wilson, are you willing? Okay, to move a deferral. I will call the question on deferral. All in favor? Yes, Mr. Dyke?
Just from a point of order, you have to explain when it's coming
Oh,
back.
I see.
I wrote the date in.
Oh, I see, right. So I have February 7th. I'm not sure if that's realistic, but we could consider the deferral until February 7th. Does that work, colleagues? Okay, we'll try that, see how it goes. All right, so I'll call the question on the deferral to Feb 7th. All in favor? Good. All right. We've dealt with the matter of other business already, so I think we're now just in the position of having to adopt our confirmation bylaw. And can I have a mover and a seconder? Councillor O'Sullivan, Councillor Wilson, thank you. And that is our confirmation bylaw for this evening for the meeting held on Jan 18th. Be adopted and passed. I'll call the vote on that. All in favor? Thank you. And then a motion to adjourn, colleagues, and that would be at 10:15 p.m. And I'm looking at Councillor Strakian and Deputy Mayor Barclay. I finally got that in, Councillor Barclay. I have to adjust my vernacular. At 10:15, motion to adjourn. I'm calling the question. All in favor? Good. Thank you. Meeting is adjourned.